It was a Tuesday, June the whatever it was, 1989, Juniper Creek, Washington, middle of nowhere basically. We'd just moved up there from Georgia, me and the boys. Nick, who was hitting his teens, and little Timmy, still in that stage where everything's why mama. South to north, big change. I was still trying to figure out the grocery store situation, let alone unpack all the boxes, but we were making do. That afternoon, I was up to my elbows in dishwater, listening to the radio. Some country song I didn't even like, but it was just background noise, you know? Nick was outside, probably messing around with something he shouldn't have been, and Timmy was usually glued to Nick's side, thinking his older brother hung the moon. Suddenly, it was like a switch flipped outside. Real, loud, frantic neighing coming from Blue, our pony. Blue wasn't a skittish animal. We'd had him for years, practically since Nick was Timmy's age. He was steady as a rock. For him to be carrying on like that, something was wrong. My first thought, honestly, was some kids from up the road were throwing rocks at him or something. You know how kids can be sometimes. Annoying. So, I rinsed the soap off my hands quick, grabbed the pellet gun we kept by the back door, mostly for squirrels raiding the bird feeder, and headed out. Nick was already halfway to the back fence, where Blue's little paddock was. I yelled at him to be careful. You never know, even a pellet gun can sting if you're not careful. He just kept going, faster now, almost running, towards the edge of our property where the woods started. We had a pretty big backyard that sloped down into a grassy bit, then it just opened up into trees. Nick stopped dead, just froze. I hurried up, my heart starting to pick up pace, not knowing why exactly, but just feeling that prickle on the back of your neck. I rounded the corner of the tool shed and saw him, Nick, standing stock still, staring out towards the tree line. And that's when I saw it too. It was Jesus. Even now, trying to put it into words feels wrong. Like my mouth can't form the sounds right to describe what my eyes saw. Standing just at the edge of the trees, in that dappled sunlight and shadow, was this thing. Tall, way taller than any man. I'm talking easily over 7 feet, maybe more. Covered in hair, thick, dark hair like a bear, but not bear-shaped. It stood upright, more like a man, but all wrong. The shoulders were too wide, the arms too long, hanging down almost to its knees. It was bulky, heavy-looking, like it weighed a ton. But the face, that was the part that twisted your stomach. Flat, squashed flat, like a monkey or something, but bigger, broader. And the eyes, they were set deep under heavy brows, and they were just watching. Cold, calculating like you were a bug under a microscope. Not angry, not excited, just assessing. My brain short-circuited for a second. I thought for a split second it was a prank, some kind of stupid costume. But even as that thought flashed through my head, I knew, deep down, in that place where you know real from fake, I knew this was no costume. This was real, and it was awful. Nick started backing away, real slow, stumbling over his own feet, his eyes locked on the creature. He didn't even say anything at first, just moved backwards, like he was in a trance. The thing started moving too, slowly, deliberately. It didn't rush, didn't run, just glided forward, its feet making almost no sound on the grass, even though it was huge. It was the way it moved. That was another part that was just wrong. Human-like in a way, but twisted, unnatural. Nick finally found his voice, but it was just a whisper at first. "Mom! Mama!" Then louder, panicked. "Mom, get back inside! Run!" He started scrambling backwards, actually running now, towards the house, tripping and almost falling a couple of times. The creature kept coming. Not chasing, not running after him, but just following. That slow, deliberate pace was somehow more terrifying than if it had been charging at us. Like it knew it had all the time in the world. I was frozen, pellet gun hanging uselessly in my hand, watching Nick run, watching that thing follow. Then Nick was yelling again from the porch now, "Mom, get inside now!" That snapped me out of it. I didn't even think, just reacted. I turned, bolted back to the house, heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Got to Nick, got him inside, slammed the door shut, fumbled with the bolt, got it locked. Timmy was right there, in the living room, looking up at us, his eyes wide, scared. He must have heard Nick yelling. "What is it, Mama? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice shaking. I couldn't even answer him, just stood there, staring at the door, listening, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Nick was right beside me, breathing just as hard, his face white as a sheet. "Did you see it, Mama? Did you see it?" He finally managed to get out. "Yeah, I saw it," I said, my voice trembling. "Jesus, Nick, what in God's name was that?" He shook his head, eyes still wide with terror. "I don't know, Mom. I don't know." We stood there for a moment, just listening. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Blue had stopped neighing, hadn't heard him since we ran inside. That made it worse somehow. The silence, it felt like waiting. Then we heard it. A heavy thud on the ground outside. Then another and another. Footsteps, but not human footsteps. Too heavy, too slow, too deliberate. I grabbed Nick, pulled him and Timmy further into the living room, away from the front door. "Stay here, both of you, stay quiet." I went into the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, a butcher knife we used for carving meat. Stupid, I know, against whatever was out there, but it was something, anything. Nick came into the kitchen too, holding a rusty old trench knife he'd found somewhere, some piece of junk he thought was cool. It was dull as butter, probably wouldn't cut through butter, but he was holding it like it was Excalibur. Bless his heart. "Mom, what do we do?" he whispered, his eyes darting towards the back door now. "We stay inside," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We stay quiet, and we don't go outside." We moved to the back window, the one that looked out over the yard towards the trees, peeking out carefully, trying to be silent, and there it was. It was in our yard, walking slowly, pacing almost, back and forth across the grass, close to the edge of the woods, but still on our property. Its head was moving, slowly, deliberately, turning this way and that, like it was sniffing the air, or looking for something, or someone. It came closer to the house, closer to the back of the yard, where the small creek ran, separating our yard from the field beyond. It stopped at the edge of the creek, right where the water was shallow enough to cross, and it just stood there, looking towards the house, looking right at us. Even though it was just a window, even though we were inside in the shadows, I knew it could see us. Those cold, dark eyes, they seemed to see right through everything. We stood there, frozen again, watching it, and it watching us. For what felt like forever, just staring at each other across that little creek. Time seemed to stretch out, slow down. Every second felt like an hour. My heart was pounding, my hands were sweating, I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. I could feel Nick beside me, tense as a wire, Timmy huddled behind us, whimpering softly. Then, without any warning, it happened. It was like the silence just shattered. The creature threw back its head and roared, not like a bear, not like a lion, nothing I'd ever heard before. It was a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in your chest, that seemed to shake the ground itself. It was filled with something. Rage, frustration, something ancient and terrible. It stepped into the creek, just splashed right through the shallow water, not caring about getting wet, its huge feet making loud splashes. It started moving towards the house, towards us. That roar just broke everything inside me. I screamed, a real scream from the gut, pure terror. Grabbed Nick and Timmy, dragged them back, away from the window, back into the house. "Run!" I yelled at them. "Get in the bedroom! Lock the door!" We scrambled, tripping over furniture, knocking things over. Got to the bedroom. Nick fumbled with the lock on the bedroom door, got it clicked shut just as we heard a heavy thud against the back door. The whole house shook. It was trying to get in. We huddled together in the bedroom, in the corner, backs against the wall, listening. Every creak of the house sounded like the thing was breaking in. Every rustle of leaves outside sounded like it was right outside the window. We heard it moving around outside. Heavy footsteps circling the house. Scraping sounds against the walls, maybe. We didn't dare to look out the window, just stayed huddled together, in the dark, shaking, listening. Timmy was crying silently now, tears streaming down his face, his little body trembling. Nick was trying to be brave, putting his arm around Timmy, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. We were all terrified. Night fell, slowly, agonizingly slowly. The darkness just made it worse. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed amplified. We didn't turn on any lights, didn't dare to make any noise. Just sat there, in the dark, listening to the sounds outside. The wind in the trees, the crickets chirping, and sometimes those heavy footsteps, that slow, deliberate pacing around our house. We stayed like that all night, locked in that bedroom, listening to the darkness, listening for the creature, waiting, praying for morning to come. I don't think any of us slept, just waited. Endless hours of waiting, the longest night of my life. Finally, the first hint of dawn started to creep through the curtains. A pale grey light. Slowly, the darkness started to recede. As the light grew stronger, the sounds outside seemed to fade. The heavy footsteps stopped. The scraping, silence. Just the normal morning sounds now. Birds chirping, a distant cow mooing, nothing else. When it was fully light, I finally dared to move. Got up, slowly, carefully, went to the window, peeked out. Yard was empty, just grass and trees and nothing, no sign of it, nothing, like it had vanished into thin air. I unlocked the bedroom door, slowly, carefully, inch by inch, half expecting it to be on the other side. But nothing, just the hallway, quiet, too quiet. We crept through the house, Nick and Timmy right behind me. Every room was empty. Everything seemed normal. Except it wasn't. The air in the house felt thick, heavy, charged with something. Fear, dread. Something that lingered even though the creature was gone. We went outside, finally, stepped out into the morning light, blinking, feeling the sun on our faces. Yard was empty, still. Except there were tracks. Huge footprints pressed deep into the grass, leading from the edge of the woods, across the yard, to the back door, circling the house, and then stopping at the edge of the woods again. And then nothing. The tracks just stopped, disappeared into the trees, like it had just stepped off the earth. And Blue. Blue was still in his paddock, quiet now, grazing like nothing had happened. But he looked different somehow, wary, uneasy, like he remembered, even if he couldn't say what. We stood there in the yard, staring at those tracks, at the empty trees, at each other. The morning was beautiful, sunny, peaceful, but it wasn't peaceful. Not really. That terror, that cold fear, it was still there, clinging to the air, clinging to us. We never saw it again, not after that night. Life went on. We unpacked the boxes, settled into Juniper Creek, went to school, went to work, tried to be normal. But nothing was ever really normal after that. Not for us. Because sometimes late at night when the house is quiet and dark, I still hear it. Not the roar, but those footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate, pacing outside, and I know somewhere in the shadows in the trees it's still out there, watching, waiting, and I don't know why, I don't know what it wanted. I just know it was real, and it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my life, and I can't explain it. I just can't. That's all I know. Story 2. It was January. Real cold for Florida, you know? Like biting cold, the kind that gets right into your bones even if you're wearing layers. Port Blossom, where I live, it's right on the coast, and that ocean wind just cuts through you. I just finished a double shift at the garage. Place was slammed all week with people getting ready for the snowbirds to come down, everyone wanting their cars checked out before they drove south. So, yeah, long day. I was wiped out, just wanting to get home, get into a hot shower and crash. It was early, before dawn, maybe 4:30 in the morning. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. Ocean Drive, where I was driving, it's pretty empty at that hour. Most of the shops and restaurants are closed up, and nobody's really out walking around. Streetlights mostly, and the odd house light spilling onto the road. But it was dark, you know, properly dark. The kind of dark where shadows seem deeper, bigger than they should be. I was driving my old Ford, the one I'd been nursing back to health piece by piece. Headlights were good, I always made sure of that. And I was doing maybe 40, 45, not speeding, just cruising. Windows were up, heater blasting because of the cold. I had the radio on low, some old blues station, just background noise really. My mind was mostly blank, just thinking about sleep. Then I saw it, up ahead in the road. My headlights caught it. At first I thought it was a deer. Happens sometimes even in town. They wander in from the mangroves on the edge of town. So I eased off the gas a little, but didn't really brake hard. I figured it had just run off into the bushes. But it didn't move. That's when I realized it wasn't a deer. It was bigger, way bigger than a deer. And the shape wasn't right. It was standing upright, sort of, in the middle of the road, just there, blocking my lane. My heart started hammering in my chest. Adrenaline kicked in. I squinted, trying to see through the darkness, through the windshield. Rain had started spitting a bit too, making everything blurry. Wipers swished, doing their best, but it was still hard to see clearly. I started braking, harder now, realizing this wasn't good. This wasn't normal. As I got closer, the shape started to take form, and my blood ran cold. It was a person, or something, that looked like a person, but impossibly big, like gigantic, and dark, so dark it seemed to suck the light in. It was just there, standing in the road. It was tall, massive, way taller than any person I'd ever seen. I'm 6 feet myself, and this thing was towering over anything human. 8 feet? 9? I don't know. It was huge. And it was dressed, if you could call it that, in rags, dark, tattered stuff hanging off it, like burlap sacks that had been ripped and shredded, and it was hairy, covered in hair. Not like human hair, but coarse, black hair all over its body, everywhere I could see in the headlights. My mind was racing. What the hell was this? Some kind of crazy homeless guy? On drugs? But no homeless guy is that big, and that hairy. It didn't make any sense. I was still braking, but I was too close now. Way too close. And it still hadn't moved. It was just standing there, stock still, like it was waiting for me. Panic set in, real gut-wrenching panic. I hit the brakes hard, tires squealing on the wet asphalt, tried to swerve to go around it. But there wasn't enough room. It was too close, too big, blocking the whole lane. Then, impact. The front of my car slammed into it, not like hitting a deer, not soft and yielding. This was solid, like hitting a brick wall. The whole car shuddered. Metal crunched, plastic cracked. The airbags didn't go off, but the jolt was violent. My head snapped forward, then back against the headrest. For a second, everything went blurry. My ears rang. I gripped the steering wheel, heart pounding, breathing ragged. Stunned, terrified, I threw the car into park and killed the engine. Everything was silent except for the rain, which was coming down a bit harder now, tapping on the roof of the car. My head was swimming, my body was shaking. What the hell just happened? For a second I just sat there, frozen, staring out the windshield, through the rain, through the cracks in my windshield now. I could see something big, lying in the road in front of my car. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, which wasn't much at that point, I fumbled for the door handle and pushed the door open. Cold air rushed in, biting at my face. I stumbled out of the car, legs shaky. My knees felt like they were going to buckle, and then I saw it again, full on. No headlights now, just the dim streetlights and the rain-washed darkness. But I could see it, clearer than I ever wanted to see anything in my life. It was rising, the thing I hit, the thing that was in the road. It was getting up, slowly at first, then faster, pushing itself up off the asphalt, unfolding, growing taller and taller. It was huge, monstrous, even bigger than it looked standing in the headlights. Now it was towering. I swear it was 8 feet tall, maybe more, and it was broad, thick, muscles bulging under that matted black hair. The rags were hanging off it, torn and dirty, but it wasn't wearing clothes. It was clothes. Like the rags were part of it, like its skin was made of rags and hair. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it made any sense. Its face, I only got a glimpse. It was mostly hidden in shadow and hair, but I saw something animalistic, low-brow, heavy, with deep-set eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark, and a wide, snarling mouth. Not human, definitely not human. Then it roared, not like a lion, not like any animal I've ever heard. It was deeper, guttural, raw. It resonated in my chest, vibrated through the air. It was a sound of pure rage, of primal fury, a sound that was meant to terrify, and it did. Oh God, it did. That roar, that sound. I'll never forget it. It's still in my nightmares. It wasn't just loud, it was wrong. Like it was coming from somewhere deep inside the earth, not just from its throat. It lunged, it moved fast, way faster than something that big should be able to move. It came at me in a rush, those huge limbs swinging, claws. Yeah, I think they were claws, or something like claws, long and dark and sharp, glinting in the streetlight. Fear took over completely, pure, unadulterated terror. My mind just shut down, instinct kicked in, survival, run. I scrambled backwards, stumbling over the debris from the crash, tripped and nearly fell. My breath hitched in my throat. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it was going to explode. I didn't even think. I just reacted. I spun around, fumbled for the car door, ripped it open and threw myself inside. Didn't even close the door properly. "Here you go," I mumbled, feeling like the biggest fool on earth. "Here's some, fruit." Laid the bananas down at the base of a big oak tree, right at the edge of the woods, where I'd seen it disappear. Then I got back in the truck, locked the doors, stupid I know, like a door would stop that, and drove away, fast. Didn't stop till I got back to the maintenance shed, lights blazing, feeling a little bit safer with walls and a roof around me. I was supposed to go back out at 5:30 a.m. to check the sprinklers again. I remember staring at the clock on the wall in the shed, watching the minutes tick by, dread knotting my stomach. 5:15 came, 5:20, 5:25. I kept thinking about those eyes, that smell, the sheer size of it. Every part of me was screaming, "Stay here, stay safe, don't go back out there." But duty, you know? Superintendent. Gotta do my job. Swallowed hard, grabbed my coffee thermos, and went back to the truck. Heart still hammering, but a little bit less, maybe. Drove back to the second tee, slower this time. Eyes scanning the woods, the water hazard, everything. Nothing. Just the golf course, still and silent in the growing dawn light. The sky was starting to lighten, pale grey streaks showing over the horizon. The smell, mostly gone now, just a faint whiff here and there, like a ghost of rottenness. I stopped the truck at the edge of the woods again, looked at the oak tree where I'd left the bananas. They were gone. Just gone. Vanished. No peels lying around, no sign they'd ever been there. Like they'd been swallowed by the darkness itself. Just the empty patch of ground where I'd left them, and the woods behind, still silent, still holding its breath. I stood there for a long time, just staring at that spot. The sun was starting to come up now, painting the sky pink and orange, chasing away the shadows. Palm Vista was starting to look like Palm Vista again, pretty and manicured and normal. But it wasn't normal for me anymore, not after what I'd seen, not after that smell, those eyes, those missing bananas. I never saw it again, never smelled that stench again. Life went back to, well, not normal exactly, but the golf course went back to normal. The golfers came, they whacked their little white balls around, they complained about the sand traps, they drank their gin and tonics at the clubhouse, never knowing what had stood just yards away in the shadows, watching them in the dark. I told the police, of course, tried to. They laughed, said I'd been drinking, said it was a bear or a prank or a hallucination. Some damn fool in a gorilla suit, the animal control guy said, chuckling into the phone. Nobody believed me. Why would they? It sounds crazy, even to me now sometimes, but I know what I saw. I smelled it. I felt it. I saw those eyes. And I know the bananas were there, and then they weren't. Vanished. Into thin air. Or maybe not so thin air. Maybe into something else. And sometimes late at night, when it's cold and still, like that February morning, I swear I can still smell it. Just a faint whiff. A ghost of rottenness, and I remember those red eyes burning in the dark, and I wonder, what the hell was that thing, and where did it go, and is it still out there? I still don't know, and I don't think I ever will. Just slammed it mostly shut, scrambled across the seat and jammed the key into the ignition. Turned the key, engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Thank God it started. I slammed the car into reverse, foot down on the gas pedal. Tires spun, spitting gravel and water. The car lurched backwards, nearly smashing into a mailbox. I didn't care, just needed to get away from it. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw it, still coming, still moving fast. Those long arms reaching, those shadowy eyes burning in the darkness. I wrenched the steering wheel, slammed the car into drive and floored it. The Ford roared, tires screaming again, and shot forward, away from it, away from that nightmare. I didn't look back, couldn't look back, just drove as fast as I could, down Ocean Drive, past the darkened shops, past the sleeping houses. Didn't stop until I was miles away from that place, miles away from that thing. I drove straight to the police station. It was the only place open that early. Parked the car, engine still running, and stumbled inside. Breathless, shaking, clothes soaked from the rain. I looked like hell, I'm sure. The officer at the desk, a young guy, looked up at me, surprised. "Sir, you all right?" I need to report something," I stammered, voice cracking. "Something happened." I tried to tell him, tried to explain, about the thing in the road, about the collision, about the creature, the hairy giant, the roar. He looked at me like I was crazy, like I'd been drinking, or worse. "Slow down, sir," he said calmly. "Just tell me what happened." I tried to calm myself, took a deep breath, and told him everything, from the beginning, driving home, seeing something in the road, the collision, the thing rising up, the roar, the escape. He listened patiently, nodding every now and then. But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe me. Not really. He thought I was some drunk driver who'd hit a deer and was making up a story to cover it up. When I finished, he said, "Okay, Mr. Flinch, let's just take a look at your car, all right?" We went outside. It was still raining, a light drizzle now. My car was a mess. Front end crumpled, headlights smashed, windshield cracked. Definitely looked like I'd hit something hard. He looked at the damage, then looked back at me, a little less skeptical now. "All right," he said. "Let's go back inside and fill out a report." He took down all the details. My name, address, what I said happened, where it happened, everything. Then he said, "We'll send an officer out to Ocean Drive, check it out, see if we can find anything." I waited there for what felt like hours, pacing the floor, heart still hammering, still shaking from the fear. Finally, another officer came back. Older guy, looked tired. He talked to the young officer quietly for a minute, then turned to me. "Mr. Flinch," he said, "we checked out Ocean Drive, like you said. We found your car debris and, well, we found some damage on the road where you described the impact. Looks like you definitely hit something." My breath hitched. Did you see it? Did you see the thing?" He hesitated. "No, sir. No creature. No sign of any animal. Just damage to the road. And, well, this." He held out a plastic evidence bag. Inside it was a clump of something, dark, coarse, hairy. "We found this stuck in your front grille," he said. "We'll send it to the lab, see what it is." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Flinch," he said again, "we'll look into it. But, well, you know, sometimes things happen. Maybe it was a bear, or something got loose from the zoo. We'll check the wildlife sanctuaries around here, see if anything's missing." A bear? Zoo animal? This was no bear. And Port Blossom doesn't have a zoo. It's a small coastal town. Mangroves and beaches, not zoos. But I didn't argue. What was the point? They wouldn't believe me. They'd think I was crazy. I just nodded, took the report copy he offered, and left. Walked out into the pale grey morning. The rain had stopped. The world looked normal. But it wasn't normal, not to me. I drove home in a daze. The image of that thing burned into my mind. The size, the hair, the roar, the speed, the wrongness of it all. I never heard back from the police. A week later, I went down to the station, asked about the lab results. They looked at me blankly, said they hadn't gotten anything back yet. And then, nothing. Silence. They just dropped it. I tried to forget about it, tried to tell myself it was the cold, the dark, the tiredness, my imagination running wild. Tried to convince myself it was just some big, hairy, homeless guy on drugs. But I knew, deep down, I knew. What I saw that night on Ocean Drive, it wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something else. Something impossible. Something terrifying. Something I can't explain. And sometimes late at night when the wind howls outside, I still wonder, what was it? Where did it come from? And is it still out there? In the dark, in the mangroves, waiting. Story 3. I was in the kitchen, washing up after dinner. Just a TV dinner for me that night, chicken pot pie. Ever since Richard passed, cooking for one just isn't the same. Anyway, dishes done. I was about to settle in with a book. Some mystery novel. Can't even remember the name now. My mind's still a mess after all this, when I heard it. A racket out on the porch. At first I figured raccoons. We get them bad out here, always tipping over the trash cans, making a mess. Richard used to get so mad about it. He'd set traps, though I never really liked that. Always felt sorry for the little critters, even if they were pests. But this was louder than usual. More like rummaging and heavy thumping, if that makes sense. Like something big was out there. My heart started to thump a little faster. Oakhaven is usually quiet, peaceful. That's why Richard and I moved out here in the first place, to get away from the city noise. But being this isolated, especially at night, it can get a little unnerving, especially with him gone. I went into the bedroom and got Richard's hunting rifle from the closet. It's an old thing, but he kept it clean and oiled, said it was always better to be safe than sorry. I hadn't touched it much since he died, just kept it there, a reminder, I guess. It felt heavy in my hands, heavier than I remembered. Loaded it up. Still knew how to do that. Richard made sure I did. Not to hurt anything, you understand, just to scare off whatever was out there. Took a deep breath and walked to the front door. Flipped on the porch light, the one above the door. That's when it hit me. The air, I mean. Smelled rank. Like wet dog, but times 10, mixed with something else. Something musky, earthy, like... I don't even know how to describe it. Just foul. Made my stomach turn a little. And then I saw it. standing right there on my porch, in the light spilling from the fixture, not more than 10 feet away. It was massive. I mean, huge. I'm not a small woman, but this thing, it towered over everything. Easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. Silhouette at first because of the rain and the way it was kind of hunched over, but even the silhouette was terrifying. Broad shoulders, long arms hanging down, and covered, just covered, in thick, matted fur, dark, almost black in the porch light. My breath caught in my throat. Raccoons. This wasn't any raccoon. This wasn't any animal I'd ever seen or even imagined. It wasn't a bear. It was something else. Something wrong. It straightened up then, slowly, deliberately. And that's when I saw its face. Or where its face should have been. Hard to describe in detail, because it was still partly shadowed, and the fur was so thick and shaggy around its head. But I saw glints of something under that fur. Something not human. Best way I can describe it is primal, brutish. It raised its hands. Huge, clawed hands they looked like, reaching towards me, or maybe just reaching. But in that moment, standing there in my doorway, heart hammering in my chest, smelling that awful stink, seeing that thing towering over me, all I could think was attack. It was going to attack, like in a nightmare when you're frozen and can't move, but the monster is coming for you. My hand tightened on the rifle. It all happened so fast after that. Pure instinct. Fear, just raw, gut-wrenching fear. I didn't think, I just reacted. I brought the rifle up, pointed it, and pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening, even indoors. Recoil slammed back against my shoulder. But the light, that's what I remember most. Not just the muzzle flash, but something bigger, brighter, like a camera flash, but 1,000 times more intense. White, blinding white light erupted from right where I'd shot. Everything went white. My ears rang. I squeezed my eyes shut for a split second, then opened them again, blinking against the afterimage. And it was gone. Just gone. Vanished. Like it had never been there. The porch was empty. Just the rain, still pouring down. The porch light casting a weak circle of yellow onto the wet wood. The smell was fainter, but still there, clinging to the air. My ears were still ringing, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I stood there for maybe a minute, maybe more, just staring at the empty porch, rifle still clutched in my hands, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Had I imagined it? Was it a hallucination? Stress? Richard dying? Maybe it was finally getting to me. But the smell and the feeling, that cold, clammy grip of terror, that was real. The rifle was smoking, still warm in my hands. I'd fired it. Something had been there. I backed inside, slowly, carefully, closing the door, locking it, bolting it. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the creak of the floorboards as I moved. Everything was too loud, or maybe everything was too quiet, except for the ringing in my ears and the rain outside. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, trying to calm down. Just breathe, Eleanor, just breathe. Probably just scared it off, whatever it was. Maybe it was just a bear, a really big, mangy bear. And the light, maybe the rain reflected the muzzle flash funny, made it look brighter than it was. Yeah, maybe that's all it was. Just a bear, and I overreacted. Then the phone rang, jangled my nerves even more. I jumped, almost dropped the rifle. It was on the kitchen counter, thank God. I picked up the receiver, hand shaking. "Hello?" My voice sounded weak, shaky. Mom, is that you? What was that gunshot?" It was Thomas, my son-in-law, Sarah's husband. They live in the mobile home on the back of the property down by the woods. "Thomas? Yes, it's me. I heard something on the porch. I thought it was raccoons, but it was bigger, much bigger. I think I shot at it." My voice was still trembling. "Bigger than raccoons? What do you mean? A bear?" He sounded worried and a little panicked. "I don't know, Thomas. I don't know what it was. It was hairy, huge, and it smelled awful. There was a pause on the other end. Then his voice, lower now, strained. Mom, I heard the gunshot from here. I grabbed my revolver, thought I'd come check on you, make sure you were okay. I just stepped out of the trailer, he trailed off. Thomas, what is it? What happened? My stomach twisted. Mom, there's things out there, in the woods, coming out of the woods. His voice was barely a whisper now. Things, what kind of things? My heart was starting to race again, fear, cold and sharp, creeping up my spine. Hairy, Mom, like you said, but more than one, a whole group of them, taller than trees almost, red eyes, glowing red eyes in the dark. They were moving towards me. My blood ran cold. Red eyes, taller than trees. This wasn't bears, this wasn't anything normal. Thomas, get back inside, lock the doors, do you see them now? I fired. Twice. I shot at them, Mom, with the revolver, didn't even slow them down, just kept coming. I ran back to your place, I'm almost there. Can you see them? Are they at your house? His voice was ragged, out of breath, fear raw in every syllable. I rushed to the living room window, peered out into the darkness, rain streaming down the glass. Couldn't see anything at first, just the black trees swaying in the wind. Then, movement. At the edge of the woods, where the trees thinned out near the edge of my property. Shapes, dark shapes moving between the trees, too big to be people, too clumsy somehow, the way they moved. I see something, Thomas, dark shapes moving. Hurry, get here now. My voice was rising in panic. A moment later, a frantic pounding on the front door. I ripped it open, and Thomas stumbled inside, soaking wet, face pale as a ghost, revolver clutched in his hand. He slammed the door shut, threw the bolt, turned the deadbolt, leaned against it, panting. They're still coming. I saw them, coming this way. He could barely get the words out. We stood there just inside the doorway listening, rain lashing the house, wind howling, but under that, another sound, a low, guttural growling. Not animal-like, not exactly. Something deeper, more menacing. Closer now, and something else, a pulsing light. Over in the woods, in the direction of the mobile home. Red light, flickering, pulsating like a beacon. We went to the window again, peered out into the storm. And there it was, over the trees, just above the tree line in the woods behind my house. A red light. Not steady, but pulsing, throbbing like a heartbeat. Spinning slowly like a demonic lighthouse in the trees. It cast an eerie red glow on the rain, on the trees, on the ground. Thomas pointed, hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the revolver steady. That light, it wasn't there before. It started after I saw them, after I shot at them. We watched it, mesmerized, terrified, as the growling sounds got closer. The house felt small, fragile, a flimsy wooden box against whatever was out there. Thomas was fumbling with his phone, dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm, professional voice on the other end. Sounded like another world. We need help. Emergency. Oak Haven, Pennsylvania, Ainsworth residence. We're being attacked by creatures, hairy, huge creatures, and there's a red light in the woods. Thomas's voice was cracking, desperate. Sir, can you repeat that? Creatures? What kind of creatures? The operator sounded skeptical, disbelieving. I don't know. Monsters. They're monsters. 7 feet tall, hairy, red eyes. They attacked me and they're heading for the house. And there's a light, a red pulsing light in the woods. Please, you have to send someone now. He was almost shouting now. Sir, please calm down. Can you describe these creatures again? And the light, what does it look like? The operator was trying to sound calm, but I could hear a note of something else in her voice now, a slight hesitation. Thomas repeated it all, voice shaking, trying to describe the indescribable. The smell, the size, the fur, the red eyes, the growling, the light. I was listening, numb with fear, watching the red light pulse in the distance, listening to the growling get closer. Finally, the operator said, "Okay, sir, we're dispatching state troopers to your location. Stay inside, lock your doors, and do not approach the windows. Troopers are on their way." "Hurry! Please hurry!" Thomas hung up, his face streaked with rain and sweat. We waited, just stood there in the dark living room, listening to the rain, the wind, the growling, the pulsing red light. Time seemed to stretch out, each second an eternity. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside made us jump, then finally sirens, faint at first in the distance, then louder, closer, piercing the night. Red and blue flashing lights reflecting through the windows, swirling across the walls. The sirens stopped outside, heavy footsteps on the porch, a loud knock on the door. "State police, open up!" A deep, official voice. Thomas rushed to the door, peered through the peephole. 2 troopers in uniform, standing on the porch, guns drawn. He unbolted the door, let them in. They looked around, wary, guns still raised. "What's going on here? We got a call about creatures?" One of them, a younger one with a fresh face, looked around, skeptical. The older one, heavier set, with a grizzled look, was scanning the porch, his eyes sharp, serious. We tried to explain. Me, stumbling over my words, trying to describe the thing on the porch, the blinding light. Thomas, still shaking, talking about the pack of them in the woods, the red eyes, the growling, the light. They listened, faces grim, professional, but I could see disbelief in their eyes. "And where are these creatures now?" the older trooper asked, voice calm but with an edge. "I don't know," Thomas said. "They were in the woods, coming this way, and that light—" He pointed to the window, to the woods behind the house. The troopers followed his gaze. The red light was still there, pulsing over the trees, casting an eerie glow on the woods. They looked at each other, a flicker of something in their eyes, not disbelief anymore, more like uncertainty. They went outside, guns drawn, shining flashlights into the woods. They went down to the edge of the trees, into the wet grass, searching. We watched from the window, holding our breath. After a few minutes, they came back. "Nothing," the older trooper said, shaking his head. "Nothing out there, no tracks, just rain and woods. And that light." He pointed to the red glow again. "What about that light?" They radioed it in. More troopers arrived. They searched the woods, with dogs, with spotlights. They searched the whole property, around the house, around the mobile home. Hours went by. The rain finally stopped. The sky started to lighten, a faint grey tinge on the horizon. And they found nothing. No tracks, no footprints, no sign of any large, hairy creatures, just mud and wet leaves and trees. And that red light still pulsing, hanging over the woods. They couldn't explain the light, couldn't figure out where it was coming from or what was causing it. It just was there. Finally, as dawn broke, grey and cold, they gave up. Said they'd investigate further in the morning, said it was probably some kind of prank. Or maybe we were seeing things, stressed, imagined it all. They didn't say it outright, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe us. They left, just left us there, with the red light still pulsing in the woods, and the silence, and the fear. Thomas and Sarah and the kids, they stayed at my place that day. We stayed inside, doors locked, windows closed, listening to every sound, jumping at every shadow. The red light. It stayed there, pulsing all day. Then, as night fell again, it just faded. Slowly, gradually, until it was gone. Just darkness in the woods again. We haven't seen anything since. No creatures, no red light. The troopers came back the next day, searched again, found nothing. They closed the case, said it was unexplained, filed it away. But I know what I saw, and Thomas knows what he saw. We both smelled it, heard it, felt the fear. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't imagination, it was real. Something real and terrifying happened that night, in the woods behind my house, and I still can't explain it. To this day, I can't explain it. Sometimes, when the nights are dark, and the wind howls, and the rain beats against the windows, I still smell, that awful, musky, earthy, rank smell, and I remember the red eyes glowing in the darkness, and that pulsing red light in the woods, and I shiver, because I know something is out there, something we don't understand, something watching, and I don't know if it's gone for good, or if it's just waiting for the next dark, stormy night to come back. Story 4. Anyway, I was driving down County Road J, that stretch between Hanson's farm and the old Miller place. Pitch black. No moon that night, just thick, starless black pressing down. Fog was starting to roll in too, coming off the woods, kind of clinging low to the ground, making everything feel muffled, like the world had turned down its own volume. Windows were up, heater blasting in the old Ford pickup. Radio was off. Just the rumble of the engine and the hiss of the tires on the damp asphalt for company. I was tired, bone tired. Been up since before dawn, wrangling cows, fixing fences, the usual farm grind. 69 years on this earth, and my bones felt every single one of them that night. Rounding that bend by Widow McGregor's woods, where the road dips a little, that's when I saw it. At first, through the swirling fog patches, it looked like just a trick of the mist, maybe some headlights reflecting weird. But then, as I got closer, it took shape. It was, well, there's no other way to describe it. It was like a big, dark dinner plate just hanging there in the air, right off the shoulder of the road, maybe 50, 60 feet into the woods. The fog was thickest down low, swirling around the base of it, so it looked like it was almost melting into the ground or floating just above it. Dark grey, or maybe a dull silver, hard to tell in that light. It wasn't shiny, not metallic gleaming, more like matte, like painted metal that had weathered years in the open. No lights blinking on it or anything, just this solid, silent shape hanging in the gloom. My foot almost slipped off the gas pedal. Heart did a little jump in my chest. I squinted, rubbed my eyes, thought maybe I was seeing things, tired as I was. Pulled the truck over to the side of the road, engine idling, staring at this thing. It was definitely there. Not a reflection, not mist playing tricks. Solid, real, and wrong. Completely out of place in the woods by County Road J, like someone had photoshopped it into the landscape, only it was real, and I was staring right at it. Now, I'm a practical man, farmer, seen a lot of strange things in my life. Nature throws curveballs, but this was different. This wasn't nature. This was something else entirely. And then I saw it, the window. On the front of this disc thing, facing the road, was this curved, almost half-circle window, transparent, like glass or plastic, but not exactly. It was clearer, somehow, crisper than glass, like looking through water so clean it's invisible. And inside that window, illuminated by some kind of light I couldn't see the source of, like it was coming from inside the craft itself, was a figure, a shape, a creature. It was sitting there in what looked like a seat of some kind, behind the window. And even now, years later, just thinking about it makes the hairs on my arms stand up. It was covered in fur. Tawny, brown fur like a deer in winter, maybe a little lighter, more golden brown in that internal light. Thick fur, you could tell. But the face was what got me. Smooth, almost childlike smooth. Like a kid's face, roundish, no wrinkles or lines, no beard, no mustache, just smooth skin. The chin, too, soft and rounded, and pale. Paler than you'd expect for something covered in brown fur. Not white exactly, more like cream-colored. But the features, they were flattened, like someone had taken a face and gently pressed it down, making it wider and flatter than it should be. Nose was broad and flat, almost like a pug dog's nose, if you can imagine. Mouth was just a thin, horizontal line. No lips to speak of, just a slit. And the ears, oh God, the ears. That's what really stuck with me, because they weren't human ears, not like dog ears or deer ears either. They were calf ears, like a baby calf, you know? Big, floppy, sticking out at odd angles from the sides of its head. Too big for the face somehow. Pinkish inside, the fur around them shorter and thinner. And the eyes. Jesus Christ, those eyes. Wide, bulging, staring straight ahead, right out that window, right at me. And they were filled with terror. Pure, unadulterated terror. The same terror I felt gripping my own insides. They weren't animal eyes. They were aware, intelligent, and terrified. Like looking into the eyes of someone trapped in a nightmare, unable to scream. They were dark, almost black, but in that internal light you could see a glimmer, a depth, like looking into deep water. And in that depth, that terror, it mirrored my own so perfectly, it was like looking at my own fear, reflected back at me. I was frozen, stuck to the seat of my truck, engine still idling, radio still off, just me and this thing, staring at each other across the fog and the woods and whatever that window was made of. And then it moved, slowly, deliberately. It raised its arms, both of them, furry arms, longer than human arms, thinner, covered in that tawny fur. It raised them up above its head, like someone surrendering, or like someone in shock. Both arms raised high, palms facing outwards, towards me, towards the road, and it just held them there, frozen, just like I was frozen in my truck seat. The lower part of its body, the part below the chest, was hidden by the bottom edge of the window and the fog swirling low on the ground outside the craft. I couldn't see its legs, or if it even had legs, just the upper body, the head, the smooth, flattened face, the calf ears, the bulging, terrified eyes, and those arms raised in surrender, or shock, or something. Time. It felt like it stopped, like everything slowed down to a crawl. I remember the sound of the idling engine, seemed louder suddenly, cutting through the silence of the woods and the fog. The faint hum of the truck's electrical system, my own breath shallow and fast in my chest, and that's all. Just those sounds and the sight of that creature in that thing with its arms raised in terror. I don't know how long it lasted. 5 seconds? 10? Felt like an eternity. Felt like my whole life was condensed into those few frozen moments, staring into those eyes, feeling that wave of raw animal fear wash over me. And then something snapped. Something in me just broke loose. Survival instinct, maybe. Adrenaline finally kicking in. Whatever it was, it overrode the paralysis. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, hard. The truck lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. I jerked the steering wheel to the right, back onto the road, and floored it. The engine roared, the truck leaped ahead, and I just drove. Didn't look back, didn't think, just drove. Fast as that old Ford would go. Faster, maybe. And as I pulled away, as I sped past that disc thing, something else happened. The headlights, they dimmed, not flickered, dimmed, like someone had turned a dimmer switch down slowly. The road ahead got darker, the trees on either side seemed to close in, and I remember thinking even then, in that panic, that's not right. Headlights don't just dim like that. And then, the sound, faint, high-pitched, almost like whining. A soft, mournful whine carried on the fog-thick air, like something was crying, but not human crying. More animalistic, desperate, lost. I didn't look back, just kept driving, faster and faster, away from that place, away from that thing, away from those eyes. Didn't stop until I was back on the main highway, back on familiar ground, lights of houses starting to appear in the distance. Pulled over then, finally, heart pounding like a drum against my ribs, hands shaking so bad I could barely turn off the ignition. Just sat there for a long time, engine off now, silence rushing back in, only the wind rustling in the trees and the distant hum of nothing much really, just the usual night noises. I checked the headlights, turned them off, turned them back on. Bright as ever, no dimming, no problems, battery fine, everything normal, except nothing was normal, not anymore. Got home eventually. Went inside, didn't say a word to Martha, just went straight to bed, clothes and all. Stared at the ceiling in the dark for hours, heart still racing. Images of that face, those eyes, those ears, burned into my mind. Slept maybe an hour, fitful, dream-filled sleep. Woke up exhausted, still shaken. The morning light seemed wrong somehow. Too harsh. The world felt different. Didn't tell Martha anything for days. Didn't know how. Didn't want to sound crazy. Just kept it bottled up inside. But it gnawed at me, you know, like a rat in the walls. Finally, weeks later, maybe a month, I saw old Peterson down at the feed store. You know Peterson, always poking around in local history, weird stories, that kind of thing. Paranormal investigator, he called himself, chuckled when he said it, mentioned it to him just casually, you know, trying to sound like it was no big deal. Said I thought I might have seen something strange out by McGregor's woods that night. Some kind of light in the sky, maybe. He perked right up, eyes lit up like Christmas trees, started asking questions. What kind of light? What shape? Did you see anything else? Hesitated, then, well, I told him. Told him everything. About the disc thing, about the window, about the creature, about the face, the ears, the eyes, the terror, about the dimming headlights, the whining sound. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't laugh. Just listened, nodding slowly, taking notes in a little pad he carried around. When I finished, he just looked at me, thoughtful. Whispering Pines legends, he said finally. Woods wanderer stories, been going around for generations. Bigfoot sightings, strange creatures in the woods. Bigfoot, I said. That wasn't no Bigfoot, Peterson. This thing, it was different. And it was inside that ship. He shrugged. Maybe the legends are misremembered, distorted over time. Maybe the woods wanderer isn't always just a hairy ape. Maybe... He trailed off, looked out the window of the feed store. Maybe there's more to it than we know. He asked me more questions, details about the shape, the size, the features, the location, the time. Seemed interested. Said he'd heard other stories, similar things from people around Whispering Pines over the years. Never anything quite like what I described, though. Not the calf ears, not the smooth face, not the terror in the eyes. Never saw that disc thing again, never saw that creature again. Drove down County Road J countless times since, day and night. Nothing. Woods just looked like woods. Fog just looked like fog. But it changed me, you know, that night, that encounter. Something shifted inside me. The world... It doesn't seem quite so solid anymore, not so predictable, not so safe. I still farm, still milk cows, still fix fences, still do the same old grind day in, day out. But sometimes when I'm out in the fields at night, under a starless sky, or when the fog rolls in off the woods, I think about it, about that disc thing hanging there in the dark, about that creature behind the window with its calf ears and terrified eyes. And I wonder... What was it? Spaceman? Some kind of wood spirit? Something from another world? Or something from right here, hidden in our own woods all along? And why was it so scared? Scared of me? Or scared of something else? And the whine, that mournful, lost sound. I still hear it sometimes in my head, in the rustle of the wind in the trees. And I still can't explain it, can't make sense of it, can't forget it. 69 years old, seen a lot in my life. But nothing like that night on County Road J, nothing that shook me so deep and stayed with me so long, and to this day, I just don't know what I saw. I really don't. It just happened, and then it was gone, leaving me here, wondering, still wondering. Story 5. It's still hard to talk about, even after all these years. I guess that's why I'm typing this out into the void. Maybe it'll help get it out, I don't know. It was back in '75, February to be exact, Cape Coral, Florida. Sweltering humidity even that time of year, that heavy, wet heat that sticks to you like glue. I was living out on one of those canals, pretty isolated spot, which I usually loved. Loved the quiet, the water right there, felt like my own little piece of wild Florida. But things started feeling different. About 3 weeks before it happened, my dog Kaiser started acting strange. Kaiser was an Alsatian, a big, strong dog, wasn't scared of anything, guard dog through and through. But he started getting jumpy at night. Every night. It would start subtle, just ears perked up, head tilted. Then the low growl rumbling in his chest, the kind that vibrates right through you. He'd be staring out into the backyard, towards the canal and the woods behind it. Nothing there, you know, just dark. But Kaiser saw something. He felt something. At first I thought maybe it was raccoons, maybe a stray cat, something getting into the trash or near the house. But it wasn't the usual animal noises. This was different. Kaiser wasn't just alert. He was agitated, restless. He'd pace back and forth, whining under his breath, like he was desperate to do something, to react, but also terrified to move. It went on night after night, the agitation building. Then came that night, February. Oppressive is the only word for it. The air hung thick and still, even for Florida. No breeze, no relief. Sleep wasn't coming easy, and Kaiser was on edge all evening. He wouldn't settle down. He was panting, even though it wasn't hot inside the house, just that damp, suffocating heat lingering from the day. He kept going to the back door, nudging it with his nose, then backing away, whimpering, like he wanted out there, but something was stopping him, holding him back with fear. Around 2 in the morning, it got worse. The whimpering turned into full-blown panic. He started barking, not his usual alert bark, but a high-pitched, frantic bark, laced with pure terror. He was running around the house from window to window, staring out, barking, then retreating, tucking his tail between his legs. I'd never seen him like that, never. Not even during thunderstorms, not when we'd heard gunshots out in the distance. This was different. This was primal fear. I was getting jumpy myself, to be honest. Whatever was freaking Kaiser out this badly was freaking me out too. I grabbed my revolver from the nightstand drawer, a .38 Special. I figured whatever was out there, if it was bothering Kaiser this much, maybe I should check it out. More out of concern for him than bravado, I gotta admit. And a little bit of annoyance too. Whatever was scaring my dog was keeping me awake. I went to the back door, Kaiser still going nuts, barking and scrambling around my feet. I unlatched the door, and he pushed past me, out onto the back porch. I thought, okay, good. He's going to go see what's out there, maybe scare it off. He was a big dog, intimidating, but he didn't go out into the yard. He didn't run towards the canal like I expected. He bolted, right back to the house. He darted past me again, squeezing between my legs and the door frame, and ran straight into the garage. I heard him scrabbling and whimpering again. I followed him, more confused than ever. He was under the car, cowered as far back as he could get, pressed up against the far wall of the garage, beneath my old Ford, just a trembling mass of fur and fear. His eyes were wide, reflecting the dim garage light, and they weren't just scared. They were hollow. Like something had drained all the fight, all the confidence, right out of him. His eyes held something I'd never seen in a dog before. Unimaginable dread. That's when the real chill went through me. If Kaiser, my Kaiser, was this terrified, whatever was out there was not normal. It wasn't a raccoon or a stray dog or anything explainable. I stepped out of the garage, into the backyard, revolver in hand, pointed down, finger off the trigger, like I'd been taught in the army. The night air was heavy, thick, silent except for the crickets and the distant hum of something, maybe traffic on the main road miles away. My heart was pounding in my chest. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I moved slowly, scanning the yard, the canal bank, the woods beyond. Nothing, just darkness and shadows. "Kaiser?" I whispered, but he just whined again from under the car. He wasn't coming out. I took another step further into the yard, towards the canal. That's when I saw it. It wasn't in the shadows. It was the shadow, except it was too big to be a shadow. Coming out of the trees, moving slowly, deliberately, into the edge of my yard, where the grass met the scrubby undergrowth. At first, I didn't really register what I was seeing. My mind couldn't process it. It was just a shape, a dark, massive shape. Then it stepped fully out of the tree line into a patch of slightly lighter darkness, and I saw it clearly. It was a figure, upright, like a man, but not a man. Too big, way too big. It must have been 9 feet tall, maybe more, colossal, and covered in hair, coarse greyish-brown hair, thick, matted hair. It wasn't fur like a bear's, but hair, like human hair, but animalistic. Its face, or what I could make out as a face, was flattened, vaguely simian, but wrong. Wrong proportions, wrong everything. The eyes were deep-set, shadowed, but I could feel them on me, watching me. Even in the darkness, I knew it was looking right at me. It was a skunk ape. I didn't know that word then, didn't know those stories. All I knew was, staring at this thing, 15 feet away in my own backyard, was that I was looking at something ancient, something not supposed to exist, something profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. It took a step towards me, just one lumbering step, but it was enough. A wave of, I don't even have the words for it. Not fear, something beyond fear, primeval terror. The kind of fear that shuts down your brain, that bypasses all reason, all logic, and goes straight to the core of your being. Instinct, pure animal instinct to survive. I reacted. Without thinking, without conscious decision, my hand came up. The revolver. I didn't aim, not really. Just pointed it at its chest, at that massive hairy chest, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into my hand, the gunshot deafening in the still night air. A flash of fire, smoke, the smell of gunpowder, and I saw the bullet hit it, right in the center of its chest. A dark splotch appeared on the greyish hair, like a stain spreading out. The skunk ape grunted, a deep, guttural sound, not a scream, not a roar, more like a cough, a grunt of pain, but low and resonant, vibrating through the ground, through me. It didn't stagger, didn't fall, just grunted. And then it turned. It turned and crashed back into the undergrowth. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, heavy footfalls receded into the woods. Gone, just like that, back into the darkness. My intention had been to empty the revolver, to keep firing until it went down or until it ran away, or I don't know what I expected, but my hand, it was frozen, completely frozen. After that one shot, I couldn't move my hand. I couldn't pull the trigger again. It was like my brain had sent the signal. I'd fired once, and then nothing. My hand was locked, stiff, mentally paralyzed. I stared at the revolver in my hand, at my finger on the trigger, and I couldn't make it move. It was the strangest thing. The most terrifying thing, more terrifying than seeing the creature itself almost, that I could be so utterly instinctively afraid that my own body would betray me, would lock up, wouldn't obey my commands. It wasn't just physical. It was like my will, my very mind, was frozen by fear. I stood there, in the darkness, for what felt like forever. Just breathing hard, gun still pointed towards the woods, hand still locked around it, unable to move, waiting, listening. Nothing, just crickets and the distant hum, and my own ragged breaths. Finally, slowly, the paralysis started to ease. My fingers twitched. I could move my hand again, bit by bit. Lowered the revolver. My legs felt like jelly. I backed slowly towards the house, eyes still fixed on the woods, expecting it to come crashing back out any second. Got back inside, slammed the door shut, locked it, bolted it. Kaiser was still under the car, still trembling, but maybe a little calmer now that the thing was gone. I sat on the floor, back against the door, revolver still clutched in my hand, just trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, what I'd just done. After a while, when I could finally move properly, when the shaking stopped, I went back outside, needed to see, needed to confirm I hadn't hallucinated the whole damn thing. Flashlight in hand, I went to the edge of the yard where I'd seen it. Shined the light into the undergrowth. Nothing. No blood, no tracks, nothing obvious. Just broken branches where it had crashed back into the trees. Then I looked back at the house, and I saw it. On the air conditioning unit. The unit was next to the back wall of the house, right by where I'd been standing when it stepped out. Pressed against the metal casing, clear as day in the flashlight beam, were handprints. Gigantic handprints. Way too big for a human hand. Long fingers, thick palms, and the pressure. It had actually dented the metal of the AC unit in places. Unsettling. Seriously unsettling. It was real. It had been there, and it had touched my house. I spent the rest of the night inside, doors locked, windows closed, revolver on the table beside me. Kaiser stayed under the car until sunrise, wouldn't come out no matter what I did. Finally, when the sun came up, he crawled out, shaky but calmer. He was never the same after that night, though. Never quite as brave, never quite as confident. Something in him was changed. Broken, maybe. The next day I started asking around. Casually at first. To the few neighbors I knew, the ones further down the canal. Mentioned my dog acting up, hearing noises at night, trying to sound like I wasn't crazy. And that's when things got even weirder. One of my neighbors, old Mr. Henderson, he went pale when I mentioned it. Said he'd been having trouble with something too. Putrid smells at night, he said, like something rotten, something dead, but not animal dead. Something else. And he'd found these smudges on his own AC unit. Gigantic fingerprints, he called them. He hadn't told anyone. Thought he was losing it, he said. Then Mrs. Peterson down the street, she chimed in too. Same thing. Bad smells, weird noises, and she'd found similar marks on her AC unit. Fingerprints that were way too big to be human. It was like a pattern, a sinister pattern of visitations, something moving along the canal, leaving its mark, its scent of whatever it was, and terrorizing the dogs. We talked about calling the sheriff, but what do you tell them? Yeah. I shot at a 9-foot-tall hairy ape man in my backyard. They'd laugh you out of the station, or lock you up. We were isolated out there on the canal, and we knew it. No one would believe us. So we just dealt with it. We put up extra lights, kept our dogs inside at night, tried to ignore the smells, the noises, the feeling that something was out there, watching. The fear hung over us, a heavy pall of unease in that already heavy, humid air. I never saw it again, never saw the skunk ape after that night. But I never forgot it, and Kaiser never forgot it either. Every night for the rest of his life, he'd go to the back door, hesitant, ears perked, sniffing the air, always watching the shadows, waiting, and so was I in a way. Still am sometimes, even now after all these years, just waiting, wondering if it will ever come back, wondering what it was, what it is. I shot it, point blank in the chest, and it just grunted and walked away. That's what gets me. That's what I can't explain. What was that thing? What did I see? And why did my hand freeze up like that? Why couldn't I fire again? It's like something in my brain, some deep, primal part of me, knew that shooting it wouldn't matter, that bullets wouldn't stop it, that some things are just beyond our weapons, beyond our understanding, beyond our control. And that is the most terrifying thing of all. It just walked away. And we were left here with the questions and the fear and the handprints on the air conditioners, chilling proof that it all really happened. Story 6. It was March, middle of March, I remember, because it was just before my kid's birthday. Hot, swampy kind of night, even for March in Florida. The air was thick, like you could chew on it, and the bugs were already out in force, buzzing around the porch light like they owned the place. We were loading up the truck, all our gear, rods, tackle box, cooler full of sodas and sandwiches, the usual stuff. Barry was bitching about forgetting bug spray. Again, he always forgets something. Me, I was just ready to get out there, clear my head after a long week at the shop. We hop in the truck, old beat-up Ford Ranger, nothing fancy, but she gets us where we need to go. Windows down, even with the humidity, because the AC's been on the fritz for months. That dirt road out to Osprey Point is always bumpy as hell, makes your teeth rattle something fierce. It's pitch black out there, no streetlights, no houses, just trees and swamp on both sides closing in on you. You got to use your high beams the whole way. The only sounds are the truck engine, the tires crunching on the gravel, and the swamp noises. Frogs croaking, crickets chirping, the low hum of insects that never really stops out there. It's usually peaceful, you know, calming. Not this time. As we get closer to the canal bend, I start feeling weird. Like that prickling on the back of your neck when you know something's off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, just a feeling. Barry was humming along to some country song on the radio, oblivious. I told him to turn it down. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, giving me that look like I was being a pain in the ass. "Just turn it down, all right?" I said, a little sharper than I meant to. He shrugged and fiddled with the dial. The silence settled back in, but it felt different now, heavier, like the air itself had gotten thicker. We round that bend, the one that always gets you because it's so sharp and sudden, and that's when we saw it. My headlights cut through the darkness, and there, smack dab in the middle of the road, was a car. Sky blue Chevy sedan, looked kinda old, maybe late 80s, something like that. Parked crooked, half on the shoulder, like whoever was driving just slammed on the brakes and bailed. But that wasn't the weird part. Next to the car on the driver's side was this thing. At first I couldn't make sense of it. It was tall. Jesus Christ, it was tall. Taller than anything human has a right to be. 8, 9 feet, easy. It was dark, silhouetted against the car, but even in that light, I could see it was hairy, covered in thick, dark hair, and it was moving. It was right up against the car, leaning on it, rocking it back and forth like it was trying to flip it over. Not gently rocking, man, like full-on, violent shaking. The whole car was shuddering. I slammed on the brakes, truck skidding a little on the dirt, killed the engine. Everything went dead quiet except for the swamp noises, which suddenly sounded way louder than before. Then I heard it, screaming, coming from the car. A man's voice, high-pitched, frantic. "Help! Somebody help me! Get it off! Get it off!" I'm staring, frozen, mouth hanging open, trying to process what I'm seeing. Barry's next to me, just as still, just as dumbstruck. The man's screaming gets louder, more desperate. "Please help me, it's gonna kill me." The hairy thing. It didn't even react to the screams, just kept shaking the car, back and forth, like a dog with a chew toy, but this toy was a damn car, and the dog was some kind of monster. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Bear? No, bears don't get that tall, not around here anyway. Plus, this was different. The way it moved, the sheer size of it. It was hunched over slightly, even at that height, with long arms and what looked like broad shoulders. It was so dark, so fast, I couldn't get a good look at details. But the overall shape, it wasn't right. It was monstrous. And the smell hit me then. God, that smell. Like a skunk, but 100 times worse. Putrid, sulphurous. It made my stomach churn. I almost gagged. "What the hell?" Barry finally whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes were wide, fixed on the thing by the car. I don't know, I breathed back, still in shock. I really don't know. The man was still screaming, now even louder, hysterical. Get it off me! Please God, somebody help! I could hear the car's metal groaning, bending under the assault. I was terrified, I ain't gonna lie. But hearing that man scream like that, something inside me snapped. We couldn't just sit there and watch. We gotta do something, I said, adrenaline starting to pump through me, pushing back the fear, just a little. We gotta help him. Barry hesitated. Dale, I don't know, man. That thing... He was pointing at the hairy figure, his hand shaking. I know, I said, my heart pounding in my chest, but we can't just leave him. I put the truck in park, grabbed my flashlight from the glove box. It felt like my hands were made of lead. I opened my door slowly, trying not to make any noise. Barry did the same on his side. We both got out, using the truck as cover, keeping our eyes locked on the scene unfolding ahead. Hey, I yelled, my voice cracking a little, trying to sound braver than I felt. Hey, you! What the hell do you think you're doing? The second I yelled, everything changed. The hairy thing, it stopped, just like that. It was like someone hit a pause button. It straightened up, slowly, deliberately, and it turned its head towards us. Even in the dark, even from this distance, I could feel it looking at us. Not just seeing us, but looking at us. It was like it was sizing us up, deciding if we were a threat or something else. My blood ran cold. This wasn't some animal. This was something else, something intelligent, something evil. Then, with a speed that was unbelievable for something that big, it moved. It didn't run. It didn't walk. It just vanished. 1 second it was there, huge and menacing, silhouetted against the blue car. The next second it was gone. Just poof. Into the trees, into the darkness, into the swamp. No sound, no rustling branches, no nothing. Just gone. We stood there, paralyzed, flashlights aimed at the spot where it had been, breathing heavily, hearts hammering in our chests. The silence was deafening. The only sound was the man inside the car, still whimpering, but quieter now, like he was in shock. We slowly, cautiously, started moving towards the car. Every step felt like it took an eternity. We kept our flashlights trained on the spot where the thing had disappeared, expecting it to jump out at us any second. We reached the car. It was a mess. Dents all over the side where the thing had been pushing, the back fender practically crushed in. The driver's side window was down, and that's where the screaming had been coming from. "Hello?" I called out, my voice still shaky. "Hello? Are you okay? We're here to help." Silence. Then a weak voice, barely a whisper. "Shh, help!" We moved closer to the window. I pointed my flashlight inside. Empty. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat was empty. The back seat was empty. The car was completely, utterly empty. Except for the damage, you'd never know anyone had even been in it, let alone attacked by some monster. Barry and I exchanged looks. Confusion, fear, disbelief. It was all there in our eyes. Where the hell did he go? The man who was just screaming for his life. He couldn't have just vanished. Could he? "Hello!" I yelled again, louder this time, shining my flashlight into the trees, into the darkness all around the car. "Is anyone there?" Only the swamp answered. Frogs, crickets, insects, and that oppressive, heavy silence. We circled the car, flashlights sweeping, searching for any sign of the man. Footprints in the dirt? Anything? Nothing. Just the car, parked crooked on the side of the road, and the stillness of the Everglades night. It was like they both just evaporated, the thing and the man. 1 second there, the next. Gone. We stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at the empty car, at the dark woods surrounding us, listening to the silence, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen, trying to convince ourselves that we'd actually seen it and not just imagined the whole damn thing. Finally, Barry spoke, his voice low and strained. "Dale, we need to get out of here." I didn't argue. I was done. My legs were shaking, my hands were clammy, and I felt like I was about to throw up. We backed away from the car, slowly, keeping our flashlights trained on the trees, just in case that thing decided to reappear. We scrambled back into the truck, locked the doors, and I practically floored it out of there. We didn't stop until we were back on the main road, pavement under our tires, houses and streetlights in sight. Only then did I finally start to breathe again. We drove straight to the Blackwater Sheriff's Department. We walked in, still shaking, still trying to wrap our heads around what had happened. The deputy at the front desk looked at us like we were crazy when we tried to explain. A monster attacking a car, a man screaming, and then nothing. They sent a couple of deputies out to check the canal bend. We went with them, pointing out exactly where it happened. They searched the area, flashlights sweeping the woods, just like we had. They looked at the blue Chevy. They even dusted it for fingerprints, though I don't know why. The whole thing was just wrong. And just like before, they found nothing. No footprints, no sign of the man, no monster. The car was still there, damaged, just like we described, but empty. Completely, utterly empty. Like it had been abandoned there by nobody, for nobody. They ran the plates on the car, came back clean, no registered owner, nothing. Like the car just materialized there, out of thin air. The deputies, they were polite, but I could tell they didn't believe us. "Probably just spooked yourselves, boys," one of them said, patting me on the shoulder. "Out in the swamp, anything can play tricks on your mind." Tricks on our mind? Both of us? Seeing the same thing? Hearing the same thing? Smelling that god-awful stench? No, it wasn't tricks. It was real. I know what I saw. Barry knows what he saw. They towed the blue Chevy back to the station, said they'd keep it for a few days, see if anyone claimed it. But I bet you anything, no one ever did. It probably just disappeared from the impound lot too one night. Swallowed up by the same darkness that took the man and the thing. Me and Barry, we haven't been back to Osprey Point since. Haven't been fishing at night, anywhere really. I can't shake the image of that thing towering over that car, rocking it like it was nothing. And that smell, I can still smell it sometimes in my nightmares. I know what people are going to say. Skunk ape, Florida Bigfoot. Legends, bullshit stories to scare tourists. But I saw it, we both saw it, and I know deep down that something really unholy happened out there that night by Blackwater Canal. Something that wasn't supposed to be seen, something that shouldn't exist. And it's still out there, I can feel it, lurking in the shadows of the Everglades, waiting for the next poor soul to wander down the wrong dirt road at the wrong time. And that's the part that really chills me to the bone. We got away, but who's to say who else will, and who's to say it won't come looking for us one day? I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, sweating, heart racing, convinced I can hear that screaming in the darkness again. And that smell, that awful putrid smell, it lingers, even now, even here. Story 7. It started subtly at first, just a feeling, an unease. Like when you know a storm's coming before you even see the clouds roll in, that prickling feeling in the air. People started talking about things rustling in the woods more than usual, branches snapping in the dead of night. Dismissed it at first. Deer, coons, possums, we had plenty of wildlife around. But then it got different. I remember it was September, early September. Harvest time was just around the corner, and the days still held on to some of that summer heat, even as the nights started getting cooler. I'd been out late, checking on the livestock. My cows were restless that night, more agitated than I'd ever seen them. They were huddled together in the far pasture, near the edge of the woods that bordered my property. They were making that low, worried mooing sound, the one they make when they sense something off. Figured maybe a coyote was getting too close, bold or hungry. Coyotes were common, but they usually kept their distance. I grabbed my flashlight and walked towards the pasture. The air felt heavy, still. No breeze at all, which was unusual. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Even the crickets had shut up. Just that nervous mooing of my cows and the sound of my own boots crunching on the dry grass. As I got closer to the tree line, I heard it. A scratching sound. Not like claws on bark, more like fingernails on wood, but heavy, rough. It was coming from the old farmhouse. The Harper place, we called it. Had been empty for years. Dilapidated. Everyone steered clear of it. Said it was unlucky, bad vibes about it. Kids dared each other to go near it, but nobody ever went inside. The scratching was rhythmic, steady, like something was deliberately scraping at the side of the house. My gut tightened. This wasn't an animal, not a normal one anyway. Curiosity and a weird kind of dread mixed up inside me, and despite every instinct screaming at me to turn around and walk right back to the safety of my porch light, I found myself heading towards the Harper place. The old farmhouse was barely visible in the darkness. The moonlight was weak that night, mostly hidden behind clouds. The house was just a black shape against the deeper black of the trees behind it. The scratching sound got louder as I approached. It was definitely coming from the side of the house facing the woods. I told myself it was probably just branches rubbing against the wood siding, but my heart was pounding in my chest like a drum. I switched on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, and cautiously moved around to the side of the house where the sound was coming from. That's when I saw it. It was standing there, right against the wall of the house, in the shadow of the overhanging eaves. My flashlight beam caught it head on, and what I saw, I will never, ever forget. It was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen. 7, maybe 8 feet tall, easy, standing upright like a man, but not a man, covered in dark brown hair. Coarse, thick fur all over its body, except for its face and around its eyes. Its chest was massive, its shoulders broad. It was built thick, solid muscle underneath that fur, I could tell. It was facing away from me, scraping at the wooden wall of the house with what looked like long, powerful fingers. The scratching sound, I realized, was coming from its claws digging into the old wood. But then it turned its head, slowly, and looked right at me. Its face, it was almost human, but not quite. The nose was broad and flat, almost like a dog's, but bigger. The mouth was just a dark line in the fur. But it was the eyes that got me. Those eyes, they were intelligent, knowing, deep-set and unnervingly human-like. They were dark, maybe brown or black, and they seemed to see right through me, right into my soul. There was no wild animal panic in those eyes, no fear, just awareness. And something else, something I couldn't place, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. It was only about 10 feet away from me, maybe less. I was frozen, couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just stared at this thing. This creature, this monster, it just stood there looking at me, no growling, no roaring, just observing. It didn't seem threatened, it didn't seem angry, it just was present. And then, slowly, deliberately, it turned away from me, back to the wall of the house and resumed scratching, as if I wasn't even there anymore, as if I was nothing. That's when the terror really hit me. It wasn't just fear of the unknown, it was something deeper, something primal. I felt utterly insignificant in the face of this thing, like I was looking at something ancient, something that didn't belong in our world, something that could crush me without even trying. My legs finally unlocked, and I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, didn't even turn to look back. Just ran, stumbled, scrambled back across the field, back towards my house, towards the light, towards anything familiar and safe. I burst through my front door, slamming it shut behind me, heart hammering so hard I thought it would explode. I was gasping for breath, drenched in cold sweat despite the warm night. My wife, Martha, came running out of the bedroom, scared half to death by the noise. "Kenneth, what in God's name?" I couldn't even speak at first. Just stood there, shaking, pointing towards the woods. Finally, I managed to get the words out. Something out there. At the Harper place. You won't believe. I told her what I saw, stumbling over words, voice cracking with fear. She looked at me like I was crazy. Martha was a sensible woman. Didn't believe in ghosts or monsters or anything like that, but she saw the look on my face. She saw the genuine terror in my eyes, and she knew I wasn't making it up. You sure it wasn't just a bear, Kenneth? She asked, her voice low. A big bear can stand up on its hind legs. Martha, I said, shaking my head, it wasn't a bear. I know a bear when I see one. This was different. It was like something from a nightmare. She didn't argue. She knew me. She knew I wouldn't get that scared over a bear or a coyote or anything normal. We have to tell someone, I said, the fear slowly turning into a cold dread. People need to know. We called up some of our neighbors, the closest ones, the Millers, the Johnsons, old Mr. Abernathy down the road. Told them what happened. Most of them were skeptical, of course. Said I must have been seeing things, that I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark. But a few of them, the men especially, they saw the seriousness in my face too. They knew I wasn't a man to scare easily. And they'd heard the rumors, the whispers going around town about strange noises in the woods, things unseen. Mr. Miller, he said. Ken, you know, my hound dog, Blue. He's been acting real skittish the last few nights. Refuses to go outside after dark. Never been like that before. Mr. Johnson nodded, said his chickens had been acting up too, squawking in the middle of the night like something was spooking them. Word of mouth travels fast in a small town like Noxie Creek. By the time we'd called a few more neighbors, the story had already started to spread. People were uneasy, scared. We decided, a small group of us, me, Miller, Johnson, Abernathy, and a couple of younger fellas armed, we'd go back to the Harper place, just to, well, we didn't really know what we'd do. But we couldn't just leave it like that, couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. It was almost midnight by then. The moon was still hidden behind the clouds, making it even darker than before. We drove in 2 trucks, headlights cutting through the blackness, down the dirt road to the old Harper place. Parked a ways off, kept the engines off, just the dim glow of the dashboard lights. We got out, each of us carrying a rifle or a shotgun. Stepping out into the night air felt different this time, thicker, heavier. The silence was almost deafening. No crickets now, no sounds at all, except for our own breathing and the rustle of our clothes as we moved. We approached the farmhouse slowly, cautiously, flashlights held out in front of us. The house looked even more sinister in the dead of night. Dark windows like empty eyes staring out at us. We spread out, circling the house, guns raised. Everything was still, too still. For a minute I thought maybe it was gone. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, fear playing games with my mind. Then we heard it again, the scratching, coming from the back of the house this time, near the woods again. We moved towards the sound, our hearts pounding, adrenaline mixed with fear coursing through our veins. As we rounded the corner of the house, there it was, standing in almost the same spot as before, but now it was facing away from the house, looking out towards the woods, its back to us, just as massive, just as imposing in the darkness. There, whispered Miller, voice trembling. He raised his rifle. We all did. We were all scared, but we were also determined. We weren't going to let whatever this thing was just roam around our land, scaring our families, our livestock. Hold your fire, I whispered back, even though my own finger was itching on the trigger. I wanted to see it again, wanted to confirm I wasn't crazy, wanted to see those eyes again. It must have heard us, sensed us. Slowly, it turned, just like before, and looked at us, at the circle of men standing there, armed and ready. Our flashlights illuminated it, painting it in stark white against the black night. Those eyes again, burning in the darkness. No fear, no aggression, just knowing. Then Miller lost it. He fired. The gunshot exploded in the night, deafeningly loud in the still air. And then we all started firing, shotguns booming, rifles cracking, point-blank range right at it. We emptied our guns. The sound was deafening, echoes bouncing off the trees, off the old house. Smoke filled the air, the smell of gunpowder sharp in our nostrils. And the creature, it didn't even flinch. It stood there in the hail of bullets, seemingly untouched, unmoved, like we were throwing pebbles at a mountain. It just stood there, watching us, those eyes. And then, slowly, deliberately, it turned away from us again and walked, lumbered almost towards the woods, not running, not fleeing, just leaving. It stepped into the shadows of the trees, and then it was gone. Just gone. Vanished into the darkness as if it had never been there at all. We stood there, stunned, guns still smoking in our hands. Silence descended again, heavier than ever, except for our ragged breathing. Did we hit it? Johnson whispered, voice hoarse. We cautiously approached the spot where it had been standing, shined our flashlights around. Nothing, no blood, no fur, no sign that anything had been hit. Just dirt and dry grass, and the holes in the side of the house from where it had been scratching. And now, probably bullet holes in the wall too, from our shots, but we were too shaken to check. We searched around the edge of the woods, too scared to go too far in. Nothing. It was just gone, like a phantom. We went back to our trucks, loaded up in silence, drove back to town, still in shock. Nobody spoke much. What was there to say? We'd shot at it, point-blank range, and it had just walked away. The next day, word spread like wildfire. Everyone in Noxie Creek knew what had happened at the Harper place, knew about the creature, knew that we'd shot at it, and it hadn't even seemed to notice. Fear settled over Noxie Creek, real fear. People locked their doors at night, kept their children inside. Farmers were afraid to go out to their fields alone, especially at dusk. For weeks, it was all anyone talked about. People saw things, heard things. Rustling in the woods, heavy footsteps at night, glimpses of something big and dark moving between the trees, always just at the edge of sight. Some people tried to hunt it. Groups of men went into the woods with dogs, with trackers, never found anything. No tracks, no sign of it. It was like it just vanished. The fear slowly faded over time. Life went back to normal, sort of. But something had changed. A piece of innocence had been lost in Noxie Creek. We knew there was something out there in the woods, something we didn't understand, something that shouldn't exist. I still live in Noxie Creek, still farm the same land, but I never go near the Harper place anymore, especially not after dark. And whenever I'm out late checking on the livestock, I always listen. Listen for sounds that don't belong. Listen for scratching. Listen for anything that might be him. I've never seen it again. Never heard from anyone who has definitively seen it since that night. But I know it was real. I know what I saw. We all know what we saw. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispers through the trees just the right way, I swear I can still feel those eyes on me, watching from the darkness. And I know, somewhere out there, in the deep woods around Noxie Creek, it's still there. Whatever it is, still out there. And we have no idea what it is, where it came from, or why it was there. And that, I think, is the scariest part of all. We just don't know. And maybe we're never meant to. Story 8. Dispatch came in around 2:20 a.m. Real standard stuff at first glance. Prowler call. Place out near the edge of the reservation, bordering the woods. The call came from a family, the Millers. Said they heard a racket out back. Sounded like something big messing with their storm door. Now, storm doors out here, they ain't flimsy things. Folks build them tough for the wind and the winter rains. These aren't screen doors you kick through. We get bear problems sometimes wandering down from the hills, so my first thought was probably just a bear getting curious, maybe trying to get into their garbage. Annoying, sure, but routine. I called for backup. Officer Davies was on patrol nearby, so he linked up with me. We rolled out to the Miller place, lights off a few blocks away, just standard procedure. Pulled up quiet and parked down the street a bit, figured we'd approach on foot. Didn't want to spook whatever it was, if it was still around. As we got closer to the Miller's house, everything felt off. Not just the usual night quiet, but a heavy kind of silence. Like the woods themselves were holding their breath. The kind of quiet that makes the hair on your neck prickle up before you even know why. We circled around to the back of the house. Miller was standing on his porch, flashlight in hand, looking shaky. He waved us over, whispered something about something big back there, real big. Davies and I unholstered our service weapons, standard issue .38 revolvers. I also grabbed the shotgun from the patrol car, figured better safe than sorry if it was a bear. Miller pointed towards his backyard, which backed right up to the tree line. It was pitch black out there, darker than dark, just thick woods swallowed up by night. Davies flipped on the spotlight mounted on the patrol car and aimed it into the yard. That beam cut through the darkness like a knife. And that's when we saw it. At first, it was just shadows playing tricks in the spotlight. Then the beam locked onto something solid, something impossibly huge. Standing in the edge of the trees, right on the edge of the Miller's property line, was this thing. It was tall, unbelievably tall. I'm a big guy, 6'2", solid build. This thing towered over even me. Miller later said he thought it was maybe 7.5 feet tall, maybe even bigger. I wasn't thinking about measuring contests at that moment, but 7.5 feet tall felt about right. Maybe even underselling it. It was covered in hair, thick matted black hair, not like bear fur though. This was coarser, more like human hair, but way denser, way wilder. It was all over, head to toe, except for its face. And that face, I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. Leathery, wrinkled skin, like old saddle leather, but stretched tight over bone and muscle. It was ugly, primordial ugly. That's the only way I can describe it. Like looking at something that shouldn't exist in this world. Its head, it just sat right on top of its shoulders. No neck to speak of. Just this massive block of muscle and bone and hair with a head jammed on top. It was so wide, those shoulders, like a damn linebacker, but thicker, heavier. Muscular doesn't even begin to cover it. Imagine a brick wall made of muscle, then add hair, and then put a monstrous face on top. Its face, the features were almost human, but warped, distorted, wrong. Its eyes were deep set, dark. I couldn't make out the color in the spotlight, but they seemed to gleam, reflecting the light in a way that wasn't human, more like an animal's eyes in the headlights. And its teeth. That's what really sticks with me. 2 big teeth on the top, 2 on the bottom, jutting out way past the others like tusks. Not long and curved like a boar's tusks, but shorter, thicker, just protruding. Its nose was flat and wide, almost like it had been smashed flat. It was the ugliest damn face I ever saw in my life, and I've seen some things in my time. I had my shotgun in my hands, safety off. Davies had his .38 drawn too. We were both just frozen, staring at this creature. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Bear? No, not even close. Man? Some kind of crazy man? Deformed? Even that felt wrong. This wasn't human, not like anything I'd ever encountered. I started moving forward slowly, cautiously. 35 feet. Maybe 30 feet, closing the distance. The spotlight was still blazing on it. I was ready to raise the shotgun, ready to... What? I didn't even know what I was ready to do. Was I supposed to shoot this thing? Was it dangerous? Was it even real? It felt like a nightmare, like I was caught in some kind of waking dream. But then something even weirder happened. Instead of running or attacking or anything I expected, it crouched down, just slowly lowered itself into a crouch, Right there in the yard, in the spotlight, with me pointing a shotgun at it. It just squatted down, like it was settling in for a chat. It looked at me. Those dark eyes, they fixed on mine. It felt like time stopped, just me, this creature, and the silence of the woods pressing in around us. We stared at each other, locked gazes, and in those eyes I saw something. Not anger, not threat, not even fear, really. More like curiosity, or maybe sadness. It's hard to put into words, but it wasn't what I expected from something so monstrous. Uncertainty was chewing at me. Was this some kind of person? Some kind of person gone wrong? Was it sick, demented? Did it need help? Or was this something else entirely? Something unnatural? I hesitated, couldn't bring myself to pull the trigger. Not yet. Something in its stillness, in the way it was just watching, held me back. Then a rustle from the side, just to the edge of the spotlight beam, in the deeper shadows of the yard. Davies, who was manning the spotlight, swung the beam to the side, fast. "Another one!" he yelled, voice cracking, and there it was. Another one, almost identical to the first, just as big, just as hairy, just as horrifying, lurking in the shadows. Two of them, two of these things. That's when I started to back away, slowly. Shotgun still pointed, eyes locked on the first creature. Davies was covering me, spotlight still bouncing between the two of them. I felt cold sweat dripping down my back, even in the damp night air. My heart was hammering in my chest. I was terrified, not just regular scared. This was primal fear, the kind that digs down into your bones and makes you want to run and never look back. As I backed up, still watching the first one, I noticed something else, steam, rising off its body, not like smoke, but like steam on a cold day, like it was wet, or exerting itself. But it was just crouched there, doing nothing. It wasn't moving, wasn't breathing heavy, but there was steam rising off it, in the cold night air. It just didn't make sense. We backed all the way to the patrol car, never taking our eyes off them. Got back inside, slammed the doors. Davies was breathing heavy, face pale. I probably looked the same. We just sat there for a second, catching our breath, trying to process what we just saw. What the hell was that, Ben?" Davies stammered finally. I don't know, Tom. I honestly don't know." My voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. We called it in, reported what we saw. Dispatch sounded skeptical, to say the least, but we were sergeants, both of us, respectable officers. They knew we weren't drunks, weren't hallucinating. They had to take us seriously. Daylight started to break, that weak grey light that comes before dawn. We went back to the miller's place with a tribal wildlife officer to investigate, to see if we were actually crazy, or if we'd really seen what we thought we saw. The storm door, it was ripped clean off its hinges. Heavy gauge plastic, thick as hell, just torn right out of the frame, like it had been ripped off by something incredibly strong, stronger than any bear, stronger than any man I ever heard of. Then we found the tracks. In the damp earth of the backyard, leading from the woods right up to the house, and then back towards the trees, were tracks, huge tracks, bigger than any human footprint, bigger than any bear paw print I'd ever seen, and definitely not deer tracks. These were humanoid in a way, 5 toes, but massive, long, thick toes. The footprints were easily 14, 15 inches long, and deep, sunken into the ground, like whatever made them weighed a ton. The wildlife officer, he was a lummy elder, name of Mr. Williams. He looked at the tracks, traced them with his finger. His face was grim. He didn't say anything for a long time, just kept looking at the tracks, at the ripped storm door, at the woods. Finally, he just shook his head slowly. "Sasquatch," he said, quiet, like he was afraid to say it out loud. "They say they live in the deep woods. We stay away from their places. They stay away from ours. Something must have brought them down this low." Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the stories you hear, legends mostly, Old wives' tales, things you don't take seriously until you're staring one in the face in the middle of the night. Then the legends become a lot less like stories and a lot more like reality. That wasn't the end of it, though. Not for that night. Davies and I were patrolling again, driving slow, maybe 10 miles an hour, just cruising along one of the reservation roads near the woods. Still shaken up, still trying to make sense of what we'd seen. The sun was starting to come up fully now, but the woods were still dark and shadowed. Suddenly, there was movement in the trees beside the road, just a flicker of black in the shadows. Then, something started running alongside the car, pounding on the ground, heavy, fast. I looked out my window, and there it was again, running right beside us. The first creature, the one we saw in the yard, keeping pace with the car, like it wasn't even trying. Its eyes locked on me again, even in the dim morning light. And then it happened. It let out a sound, not a growl, not a roar, not like any animal sound I'd ever heard. It was piercing, high-pitched, but deep at the same time, like a scream but not human, a chilling, piercing cry that echoed through the silent woods. It was so loud it vibrated in the car, in my chest. It was unearthly. It was like something ripped straight out of a nightmare. It ran alongside the car for maybe 100 feet, that high, piercing cry tearing through the morning air. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it veered off into the trees, vanished back into the darkness of the woods. Silence fell again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This silence was tainted, haunted, filled with the echo of that cry. Davies and I just sat there in the car, staring at the woods, listening to the ringing in our ears. We didn't say a word. What could we say? What do you say after something like that? We went back to the station, wrote up the reports, detailed everything, the ripped door, the tracks, the creatures, the cries. It went into the files, somewhere, probably gathering dust now. I don't know what happened with it. What could happen? What are you supposed to do when you're faced with something that shouldn't exist? The reports spread around the reservation. People talked, whispered. Fear rippled through the community. More sightings started coming in. Dozens, then over 100. People seeing things in the woods, hearing things, things they couldn't explain, things that sounded a lot like what we saw that night. The fall of 75. It was a strange time on the Lummi Reservation. Me? I tried to forget it, tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, a mass hallucination, anything to make it go away. But I can't. I can still see its face, hear that cry, feel that cold primal fear in my gut. I don't know what they are, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them, but they're out there, in the deep woods. And sometimes they come down from the hills, and sometimes they look right at you, and you know deep down that you've seen something you were never meant to see, something that changes the way you look at the world forever. I haven't talked about this much, not really, not outside of a few close friends and colleagues over the years. People just don't believe it. They laugh, they roll their eyes, they think you're crazy. And honestly, sometimes I wonder if I am, if I just imagined it all. But I know I didn't. I know what I saw, and I know I'll never forget it. Never. That night, it's still out there in the back of my mind, waiting. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the wind rustles through the trees, I swear I can almost hear that high, piercing cry again. And I get that cold, chilling feeling, like it just happened yesterday. Like they're still out there, watching, waiting, and I still can't explain it, and I don't think I ever will. Story 9. It's still hard for me to talk about even now, so many years later. It's one of those things that, well, it just changes you. You look at the world differently afterwards. I guess that's why I'm even typing this out. I've been reading some stuff online, forums, places where people share weird things they've been through, and seeing it all makes me think maybe, just maybe, someone else out there has seen something Similar? I don't know. Probably not. But it feels like maybe getting it out there, saying it out loud in some form, might help something. I don't even know what something is. Closure? Confirmation I didn't completely lose my mind? It was November 1975, Havenwood County, Florida. Think citrus groves for days. That's where I grew up. Back then it was quieter, less built up than it is now. More woods, more orange trees stretching as far as you could see. We were kids, teenagers really. Me and 6 friends. It was Friday night, end of the week, and someone, I think it was Mark, had the idea to have a campfire out in the woods. Kind of deep in, but not too far from the edge of Old Man Hemlock's grove. He was pretty chill, Hemlock. Didn't really bother anyone as long as you weren't messing with his trees. We piled into Dave's old beat-up station wagon, like a clown car really, crammed with firewood. Beers we snuck from someone's dad's garage. Mostly lukewarm Schaefer, if I remember right, and some chips and stuff. Being teenagers, you know, simple times. We found a spot we used to use, down a dirt track, past the first line of trees. It was kind of a clearing, always felt secluded but still close enough to walk back to the road if you needed to. We were comfortable there. It was our spot. We got the fire going pretty easy. Dry leaves, twigs, a bit of newspaper, and whoosh, up it went. That smell, you know, wood smoke on a cool night. November in Florida is... brisk is a good word for it. Not freezing, but definitely cooler than what you expect if you're thinking sunshine state. It gets darker earlier too, so by the time the fire was crackling and throwing out some real heat, the woods were properly black around us. We were just doing what teenagers do around a campfire. Telling stupid stories, some jokes that probably weren't even funny, bragging about stuff, talking about girls, you know the drill. Couple of beers in, everyone's feeling relaxed, warm by the fire, the usual. Then the sound started. It wasn't loud at first, just a rustling, like maybe a deer or a raccoon, something normal in the woods. But it was close, too close, like just on the edge of the firelight. We all kind of went quiet, listening. I remember someone, maybe it was Sarah, said, "What's that?" in a really quiet voice, like she didn't want to make it louder by talking about it. The rustling kept going, and it started getting heavier. Not like branches breaking, but more like something big moving through the brush, pushing through it. It was definitely bigger than a deer, bigger than any raccoon I ever heard. Then there was a snap, a proper branch, a thicker one, just cracked, like something had stepped on it and it just gave way. And it was close, real close now, just at the tree line, maybe 10-15 feet from the fire's edge. Everyone went silent, completely silent. Even the fire seemed to quieten down, or maybe that was just my ears focusing on the rustling. My heart started pounding. You know that feeling, that cold rush in your gut, like something's wrong, really wrong, and you don't know what it is, but every nerve in your body is screaming danger. Then they stepped out. Not stepped, really. More like emerged. It was slow, deliberate, like they were just walking out of the shadows, into the firelight, and they were huge, just unbelievably huge. Figures, dark, massive shapes, and there were 3 of them. I know people use the word Bigfoot these days. I'd never heard of that word back then. Not in 1975 in Florida. We didn't have Bigfoot in our vocabulary. But that's the only thing I can think of now to describe what we saw, because they were like hairy, giant man-things, upright but massive, covered in dark fur or hair. It was hard to tell in the firelight, but dark, thick stuff. The biggest one, it was easily 8 feet tall, maybe taller. It just towered. The other 2 were still huge, but maybe a little smaller, but not by much. They moved slowly, deliberately. They didn't rush or charge. They just walked into our clearing. I remember the firelight flickering on them, throwing these weird, long shadows that danced and twisted behind them. And the smell. There was a smell. It was musky, animalistic, but Also something else. Something kind of rotten. Not exactly rotten meat, but just unclean, wild. It filled your nose, you could taste it in the air. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic just ripped through us. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed, I don't think. We were just frozen, staring at these things around our campfire. I remember thinking, this can't be real. This has to be a joke, some kind of sick prank. But it wasn't. It was real. Horrifyingly real. Then someone screamed. I think it was Carol. Just a high-pitched shriek that cut through the night, and that broke the spell. Everyone just exploded into action, scrambling, shouting, knocking over beers, chairs, kicking wood out of the fire. Everyone was just trying to get away, get back to the cars, back to the road, back to anywhere that wasn't there. I remember scrambling for my flashlight. Dave had one too, and Mark probably had his in his truck back on the track. We started shining them around, almost instinctively, like pointing lights would make it safer. Stupid looking back, but that's what we did. The beams danced around, cutting through the darkness, catching glimpses of trees, bushes, and then them again. They hadn't moved much. They were still just standing there, closer now, closer to the fire, watching us. Just watching. That's what's so creepy. They weren't making aggressive moves, not growling or charging or anything. They were just observing, studying us, like we were animals in a zoo and they were the visitors. Then something snapped in me. Some stupid teenage bravado, adrenaline, dumb curiosity, I don't know what it was. But instead of running with everyone else, something made me want to see them closer. Maybe get a better look. And maybe, just maybe, get proof. Proof of what we were seeing. Because I knew even then that nobody would believe us. Not without proof. I had my camera in the car. My dad's old Polaroid. Not the instant kind. No, the proper one, with the flashbulbs and everything. It was a decent camera, had a good lens, and most importantly, it had a proper flash. A powerful flash. "Wait!" I yelled or tried to yell. It probably just came out as a croak. But I stopped running. Everyone else was already halfway to the track, disappearing into the trees, yelling and crashing through the undergrowth. But I stopped. I turned back towards the fire, towards them. "Jeremy, come on," I heard Dave shout from the darkness. But I didn't listen. I was already moving towards the car, my car parked on the track, about 50 yards away. I sprinted for it, heart hammering, adrenaline pumping. I fumbled with the keys, unlocked the trunk, grabbed the camera bag. Felt stupidly heavy all of a sudden. I slammed the trunk shut, turned back towards the clearing. They were still there, by the fire, still just watching. The fire was dying down a bit now, flames getting lower, but still enough light to see them. To see details. The thick fur, matted in places, darker in the shadows, reddish-brown where the firelight caught it. The sheer size of them, their arms long, hanging down past their knees, their faces. I couldn't really make out details in the dim light, just dark shapes, but I could feel them looking at me, even from that distance. I pulled the camera out of the bag, fumbled for a flashbulb, jammed it in, felt cold metal against my sweaty fingers. Clicked the back shut, adjusted the lens. I knew I wanted a mid-range shot. Not too close, not too far. Something to get the whole figure in frame, but still show some detail. I knew it was risky getting closer, but I had to get a good shot. I had to get proof. I started moving towards them again, slowly this time, not running, just walking. Creeping through the undergrowth, trying to stay low, crouching down, moving behind bushes, anything to make myself a smaller target, even though I knew it was probably pointless. They could see me. I knew they could. I got closer, closer than I thought I would. Maybe 30 feet away now, 25. I was low down in the tall grass, trying to keep hidden, aiming the camera, trying to focus. It was dark, even with the dying fire. hard to see properly through the viewfinder, but I was getting closer, hoping they wouldn't move, hoping they wouldn't do anything. I thought they were still at a distance. I thought they were still by the fire. That's what I was focusing on, the area around the fire, in the viewfinder. 40 feet, maybe 50 feet, that's what I was focused for. Mid-range shot, like I said? That's where I thought they were. Then I heard it, soft, barely audible, just behind me. A footstep, on the leaves, soft, muffled, but definitely a footstep. And it wasn't human, too heavy, too something else. My blood went ice cold. Every hair on my body stood on end. Slowly, so slowly, I started to turn my head, keeping the camera pointed forward in case I still had a shot, just turning my head inch by inch, trying not to make a sound, trying not to provoke anything. And then I saw it, right there, not 40 feet, not 50 feet, 2 feet, maybe less. It was right behind me, towering over me, massive, the biggest one, the 8-foot one, standing right there, looking down at me, face to face, or face to, well, whatever you call it. It was just there, massive, dark, close, incredibly close, closer than I could ever have imagined, its gaze fixed on me, intensely. I could feel its eyes on me, even in the dim light, even through the fur, or hair, or whatever it was. I could feel its attention. It was the smell again, stronger now, musky, wild, unclean, and something else, something ancient. That's the only word that comes to mind, like it was something from a time before time, something old, so old. I froze, completely paralyzed, couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just stared up at it, at this thing, this massive, unbelievable creature standing right there in front of me, closer than anyone should ever be to something like that. Then, instinct. That's the only thing I can call it. Just pure, primal instinct took over. Before I could think, before I could even process what was happening, my hand moved. My finger pressed the button. The flash. Whir. Click. Blam. First, the charging whine of the flash unit, a faint, high-pitched sound, barely noticeable in the sudden silence around us. Looking back, I think maybe that whine, maybe that was what drew it closer in the first place. Maybe it was curious about the sound. Maybe it was drawn to it like a lure. I don't know. I'll never know. Then the flash, the blinding, searing flash of the bulb exploding. Everything went white, pure white light, like the sun had just detonated in my face. I was completely blinded, couldn't see anything but white, and the sound, the crack of the flashbulb, echoing in the sudden stillness, instantly, immediately, the reaction, explosive, faster than anything I could have conceived, faster than anything human. It moved, it reacted to the flash with a speed that was just unnatural. It leaped, jumped backwards, away from the light, into the darkness, but not before its arm, its massive, hairy arm, flailing, swinging out as it moved. It connected, with me, right shoulder, a glancing blow maybe, but enough, more than enough, the force of it, unbelievable, like being hit by a truck, but faster, more sudden. I didn't just get knocked over, I was launched, sent spinning, flying backwards, through the air, 15 feet, they said later, measuring it. 15 feet I was thrown backwards, like I weighed nothing, like I was a rag doll. I landed hard, on my back, the air completely knocked out of me. Everything went black for a second, or maybe it was still white from the flash. I don't know, just darkness and pain, sharp, burning pain in my back, my shoulder, my head. Everything ached, but I was alive, still breathing, even if it hurt like hell. I lay there for a moment, gasping, trying to get air back into my lungs, trying to understand what just happened, trying to see. My vision was blurry, still spots of white dancing in front of my eyes, ears ringing, head spinning. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up, sat up, looked around, disoriented, confused. Where was I? What had happened? Then the memory flooded back, the fire, the creatures, the camera, the flash, the hit, flying backwards, landing. I looked down, my hand, still clutching something, The camera, still in my hand. Clumsily, I brought it up, looked at it. The flashbulb, burnt out, smoke still drifting from it. The lens, smudged maybe, but still there. The camera, still intact, somehow. And then it hit me. The picture, the photograph. I'd taken it, at point-blank range, focused for 40 feet. Completely out of focus, completely overexposed, useless. I knew it instantly, in that moment. Before I even developed the film, I knew the picture would be useless. Proof? There would be no proof. I got back to the car, stumbling, dazed, still shaking. Dave and Mark and the others were there, waiting, frantic, faces white in the dim light of the car's headlights. They helped me into the car, asked what happened, were I okay? I couldn't really talk, just mumbled something about something big, a flash. I don't even know what I said. I was still in shock. We drove back, fast. Nobody said much. The ride was silent, heavy, the air thick with unspoken fear. When we got back to Dave's house, everyone just kind of scattered, went home. Nobody talked about it, not really, not to each other, not to anyone else. It was like a pact of silence, something too unbelievable, too terrifying to share. I developed the film a few days later, alone, in my bathroom, making Hift darkroom. I knew what I was going to see, but I still had to look. In the woods, watching, waiting, and for what? I have no idea. And that's the scariest part of all. The not knowing, the unanswered questions, the feeling that something out there, something huge and unknown and powerful, is just beyond our understanding, and maybe, just maybe, closer than we think, closer than we ever want to imagine. Story 10. Okay, so I guess I'm finally gonna write this down. Been putting it off for years, decades even, but thinking about some of the stuff I've read on here. Figured maybe someone might understand, or at least believe me, you know? It's not easy to talk about even now. People just look at you funny or worse, like you're crazy. It was December, must have been 75. Vaughn, Montana. We lived on a farm, pretty isolated, you know, way out from town. Just me, my sister May, and Dad. Mom had passed a few years before. It was cold, real cold. That kind of Montana winter cold that bites right through you, even if you're layered up. Snow was thick on the ground, everything white and still. I remember it was afternoon. Sun was starting to go down already, even though it felt like it should still be midday. We were inside, probably doing homework or chores, something like that. I was by the window, just kind of looking out, you know, daydreaming maybe, when I noticed the horses. They were out in the far pasture, the one that backs onto the woods, and they were acting weird. Normally they're pretty chill, especially in the winter. Just kind of stand around, maybe munch on some hay, whatever. But this was different. They were all bunched up, and they were moving around a lot, pawing at the snow, kicking up their back legs, tossing their heads. And they were whinnying, not just normal whinnies, but like scared whinnies, like they were really freaked out about something. May noticed too. She came over to the window, and we both just stood there watching them for a bit. It was getting to us. They're being so agitated. Horses are smart. They don't spook easily for no reason, especially ours. They were used to everything out there. Something's bothering them, May said, finally, quiet-like. Yeah, no kidding, I answered. They're acting crazy. We watched them for a few more minutes, and it just kept getting worse. They started running around in circles, still whinnying their heads off. It was making my stomach clench, just watching them like that. We knew we had to go check it out. Dad wasn't around. He'd gone into town for supplies or something. It was just us. Come on, I said to May. Let's go see what's up. She looked hesitant. You think we should? She asked. May was always a little more cautious than me, but I was older by 2 years and felt responsible, I guess. Yeah, we got her. Something's definitely wrong. Maybe one of them's hurt or something. So we bundled up. Big coats, hats, gloves, scarves, the whole deal. It was freezing out there. We headed out the back door and started walking towards the pasture. As we got closer, we could hear the horses even louder, their scared sounds carrying in the cold, still air. It was really unsettling. We climbed over the fence into the pasture. The snow was deep, crunching under our boots. The horses saw us coming and ran towards us, almost like they were trying to get closer to the house, away from something else. They surrounded us, nudging us with their noses, still all jumpy and nervous. We tried to calm them down, talking to them softly, stroking their necks, but they were too wound up. They wouldn't settle. And then I saw it. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. It was standing out in the field, near the tree line, maybe a couple 100 yards away, like the story said, just standing there, in the snow. It was big, really big, taller than anything I'd ever seen, way taller than a person, and it was hairy, covered in dark, shaggy hair. It was hard to make out details at first because of the distance and the way the light was, but it was definitely something. Something huge and dark and just wrong. May saw it at the same time. She gasped, a sharp little sound next to me. I felt my heart jump into my throat. Fear just washed over me, cold and sudden. We both just froze, staring at it. It didn't move for a second, just stood there like a statue in the snow. Then it shifted a little, and I could see it better. It was definitely standing upright, like a person, but nothing like any person I'd ever seen. It was monstrous. That's the only word for it. Huge, broad shoulders, long arms hanging down, covered in that thick, dark hair. And the way it moved, kind of heavy, deliberate, but it moved. And that's when the real terror started to set in. I remember feeling this cold dread, starting in my stomach and spreading out through my whole body. It was like my blood turned to ice. I couldn't breathe right. My legs felt like they were going to give out. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what it could be. A bear. But it was standing up too straight, and the shape was wrong. Plus, we didn't get bears that close to the farm, especially not in broad daylight. It didn't make any sense. And then I remembered the stories. Dad sometimes talked about things he'd heard, old stories from way back, from other folks around these parts, about things in the woods, big hairy things. Things people didn't like to talk about, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you wanted to call it. I'd always thought it was just stories, tall tales, nothing real. But looking at this thing out in the field, in the snow, I knew, deep down, in a way that chilled me to the bone, that's exactly what it was. It was real, and it was right there, in front of us. I don't know how long we stood there, just staring, paralyzed. It felt like forever. Then something snapped in my head. Instinct, maybe. Survival. I knew we had to do something. We couldn't just stand there. "The rifle," I whispered to May, my voice shaking. "In the house. Dad's 22. May just nodded, her eyes wide and fixed on the creature. She looked like she was about to faint, but she understood. "Stay here," I told her, even though I didn't really want to leave her alone out there, not with that thing. "Just don't move. Don't make a sound." And then I started to run. I ran as fast as I could, back towards the house, my boots sinking into the snow, the cold air burning in my lungs. I didn't look back, I couldn't. I just kept running, driven by pure fear. I burst through the back door, stumbling into the kitchen. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I ran to the gun cabinet, fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get them to work. Finally, I got it open, grabbed Dad's .22 rifle and a box of cartridges. I loaded the rifle as fast as I could, my fingers clumsy and numb. I chambered around and then I ran back out. May was still there, in the pasture, just like I'd left her. The horses were still circling around her, restless and scared. And the creature, it was still there too. It hadn't moved much, just stood there watching, or maybe just being there. It was hard to tell. I raised the rifle, aiming towards it. The rifle felt heavy and cold in my hands, but it also felt like something, anything to fight back with. I looked through the scope. It was clearer now. I could see its face, and what I saw, I will never forget it. It was dark and awful, like I told the deputy later, not human, definitely not human, grotesque, with these heavy brow ridges, a flattened nose, and these deep-set dark eyes that seemed to look right through you. It wasn't like an animal's face, and it sure wasn't like a human face. It was something else, something ancient and terrible. Just looking at its face, I felt this wave of revulsion and fear so strong it almost knocked me off my feet. It was like looking into something evil. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's the only way I can describe it. But I had the rifle now. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand there and let it, whatever it was, just stand there. I knew somehow that it was dangerous, that it wasn't supposed to be there, that we were in danger. So I did the only thing I could think of. I fired a shot. I aimed up into the air, way over its head, and pulled the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound sharp and loud in the still air. The horses jumped, even more spooked now, if that was possible. But the creature, it didn't even flinch. It just stood there, still, watching us. It was like the shot didn't even register with it. Like it was too big, too powerful, to be bothered by something like a .22 rifle. My heart sank. The warning shot hadn't worked. It hadn't scared it at all. It was just there. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen again, fear gripping me tighter this time. May was just standing there, eyes wide with terror, watching me, watching the creature. I took another breath, trying to calm myself. I had to try something else. I raised the rifle again, aimed a little higher, still not at it, not really wanting to hit it directly, just wanting to scare it, to make it go away. And I fired again. Another shot into the air, even louder this time because my ears were already ringing from the first one. And then something completely unexpected happened. The creature, it slumped, just like that, like it had been hit. It went down in the snow, heavy and sudden. May and I both gasped. We couldn't believe it. Had I actually hit it with a .22? It seemed impossible. It was so big, so massive. A .22 rifle was nothing against something like that, right? But it was down. It was lying in the snow, and then it started to move. It didn't get up right away. It started dragging itself across the snow, using its arms, its huge, hairy arms, to pull itself forward, like something that had been crippled but was still alive, still trying to move, to escape, or to something. It was the most bizarre, horrifying thing I'd ever seen. This giant, monstrous creature dragging itself across the snow, leaving a trail in the white powder. It was so unnatural, so wrong. It moved slowly, agonizingly slow, pulling itself towards the tree line, towards the woods, towards cover. It was like it was wounded and it was trying to get away. And then, just when I thought it was finally going to disappear into the trees, it stood up. It struggled for a second, wobbling, swaying, but then it was back on its feet. And it was even more horrifying somehow, standing there again, after being down, after dragging itself, after whatever had just happened. And then I saw them, coming out of the trees. More of them, not just one, but 3, 4. It was hard to tell for sure in the shadows of the woods, but there were more of them. They were coming out, moving towards the wounded one, the one that had slumped in the snow. And they weren't attacking it. They were helping it. They were supporting it, holding it up, guiding it. They were putting their arms around it, on either side of it, and they were helping it walk, helping it towards the woods, supporting it and leading it into the trees. That was when we broke, completely. May screamed, a real scream of pure terror, and I couldn't take it anymore. I dropped the rifle, I don't even remember doing it, and I grabbed May's hand, and we just ran. We ran back towards the house as fast as we could, screaming ourselves now, stumbling through the snow, not looking back, not stopping, just running. We ran into the house, slammed the door shut, bolted it, locked it, everything we could think of. We ran into the living room, huddled together, shaking, crying, our hearts pounding like drums in our chests. We didn't stop shaking for hours. We didn't even talk much, just clung to each other, terrified. We didn't go back outside. Not that day, not that night. We stayed inside, huddled together, listening to every sound, jumping at every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind. Dad came home late that night, didn't say where he'd been, but he could see something was wrong as soon as he walked in the door. We were both a mess, white as ghosts, still trembling. We tried to tell him what we'd seen, but it all came out jumbled and broken, tears and sobs mixed with words about a big hairy thing, horses, a rifle, woods. He didn't believe us, of course. At first, he thought we'd imagined it or seen a bear or something, but he could see how genuinely terrified we were. He'd never seen us like that, and we insisted we wouldn't back down. Finally, he went outside the next morning after sunrise. He went out to the pasture. We watched from the window, barely breathing, waiting for him to come back. He was gone for a long time. When he came back, he was different. He was quiet, pale. He didn't say much at all. He just looked at us with this strange look in his eyes. "There's something out there," he said finally, his voice low and grave. "Something big. I saw tracks in the snow, like nothing I've ever seen before, big footprints, too big for a bear, too big for anything human." He didn't say anything else. He didn't say it was a Bigfoot or anything like that. He didn't need to. We all knew. We all knew what we'd seen, and we all knew that something changed that day. The sheriff's deputy, Walstort, he came out a few days later. Dad called him. He listened to us, took down our statement. He didn't laugh, like some people probably would have. He just listened. He was quiet, thoughtful. He'd heard stories, he said, from other people out in the county. Strange stories. He looked out at the pasture, at the woods. "Montana's a big place," he said finally. "Lots of wild country, lots of things we don't understand." He didn't say he believed us, exactly. But he didn't say he didn't either, and somehow that was enough. We never saw them again, the creatures. Nothing like that ever happened again, not on our farm. But I've never forgotten it. Never. The fear, the sight of that thing, that face, the way they helped each other. It's all still so vivid, so real, even now, all these years later. And sometimes, especially in the winter, when the snow is falling and the woods are quiet, I think about them, out there, somewhere, in the wild places, and I still get that same cold feeling in my stomach, that fear, that feeling that there are things in this world we just don't understand, things we're not meant to see. And that day, out in the pasture, in the snow, we saw something real, something terrifying, and I still can't explain it. I know what we saw, and that's enough. It's more than enough. Story 11. I was heading east, just outside of Great Falls, not too far from the airport, out on some road that was basically just blacktop and snowbanks. It was twilight, that real murky kind of twilight where it's not quite dark, but the light's all gone grey and everything looks kind of washed out and, I don't know, spooky almost. The kind of light that plays tricks on your eyes. Anyway, I was just rolling along, minding my own business, listening to the radio, some country station probably, when something caught my eye. Off to the side of the road, in a field, there was something. At first, I thought it was a tree. You know how sometimes at dusk, trees look weird shapes. But no, this wasn't a tree. This thing was moving. Or it had moved. It was standing still when I saw it, but I swear just a second before, it was like it had just stopped. I slowed down a little, squinting. The field was all snowy, and the ground was uneven with little drifts here and there. And this thing, it was huge. I mean really unbelievably big, taller than any man I'd ever seen by a mile. Easily 7 feet, maybe even more. It was shaped like a man in a way, but wrong. Massive shoulders, long arms, thick legs, and covered in dark fur. I swear to God, my first thought was, is that a bear standing up? But no, bears aren't built like that. And this thing was just standing there, upright at the edge of the field, just there. It was silhouetted against the fading light, so it was hard to make out details at first. But the size of it, it was immense. I'm not gonna lie, my heart started to pound a little. I'd heard stories, you know? Everyone's heard stories. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. You hear about them, but you never really believe it, not really. You think it's just campfire tales and crazy people in the woods. But seeing this thing, it wasn't a story anymore. I don't know what came over me. Adrenaline, I guess. Stupid curiosity. Maybe just disbelief that I was actually seeing what I was seeing. I've always kept a hunting rifle in the truck, a 30-30 lever action for just in case, you know? Never used it except for target practice, but it was there. And suddenly, without even really thinking about it, I slammed on the brakes, threw the truck into park, grabbed the rifle off the rack, and jumped out. Looking back, I know it was the dumbest thing I could have done, completely idiotic. But in the moment, it just happened. It was like my brain short-circuited, and all that was left was this crazy impulse to what? To get a closer look? To hunt it? I don't even know. It was just pure, stupid instinct. The cold hit me like a wall as soon as I got out of the cab, freezing air, biting wind. But I didn't even notice it then. I was focused on that figure in the field. I chambered around, the click sounding way too loud in the stillness of the twilight, and I started walking towards it, across the shoulder of the road and into the field. The snow crunched under my boots, loud as gunshots in the silence. I kept the rifle raised, not really aiming it, but just holding it ready, walking slow, trying to be quiet, even though I knew there was no way I was being quiet with the snow crunching like that. I got closer, maybe 50, 60 yards away, and that's when it turned. It had been facing away from me, or at least sideways, but now it turned its head, then its whole body, slowly, deliberately to face me, and that's when the real fear hit me. It wasn't just the size, though, God, it was massive, bigger even than I thought from the road, and closer, it wasn't just dark fur. It was matted, thick, almost black in the fading light, and the smell, I could smell it even from that distance, a heavy, musky animal smell, like a wet dog mixed with something wild and old. But it was the face that really got to me. Even in the twilight I could see it, not clearly, not details, but the shape, the impression. It was almost human, but not. Broader, flatter nose, heavy brow ridge, and the eyes. They seemed to catch what little light there was and reflect it back. Dark, deep-set eyes, and they were intelligent. That's the thing that scared me the most. It wasn't just some dumb animal. There was something behind those eyes, something knowing. And then it moved. Not towards me, not aggressively, just it shifted its weight, maybe took half a step forward, and it was immense, towering, intimidating in a way I can't even describe. It wasn't just its size, it was the presence of it. Like standing in front of something ancient and powerful, something that shouldn't be messed with. A wave of pure primal fear washed over me. Not just regular fear, like being scared by a loud noise. This was deeper. It hit me in the gut, in my bones. It was the kind of fear that tells you instinctively that you are in danger. Mortal danger, that you are outmatched, outclassed, and you need to get out. Now, my legs just gave way. Not literally, but I knew instantly I couldn't go any closer. I didn't want to go any closer. I wanted to run, to get away from that thing, to get back to my truck, to safety, to anything that was further away from that creature. I started backing away, slowly at first, keeping my eyes on it. The rifle felt heavy and useless in my hands. What was I going to do with a 30-30 against that? It was like bringing a pea shooter to a tank fight. It just watched me. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, massive and silent, its dark eyes fixed on me. And in that silence, I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. my breath coming in ragged gasps. The crunch of my boots in the snow as I backed away was deafening to me, but it didn't seem to faze it. I backed up until I was at the edge of the field again, back on the shoulder of the road, and then I just turned and ran, full-out sprint, back to my truck. I didn't even look back. I just ran. The cold air burned in my lungs, my legs were pumping, and all I could think about was getting back inside the cab, locking the doors, getting the hell out of there. I fumbled with the door handle, yanked it open, and practically dove into the truck. Slammed the door, locked it, threw the rifle back on the rack, and started fumbling for the keys. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. Finally, it turned over. The engine roared to life, and I threw it into gear and peeled out. Tires spinning on the icy road, fishtailing a little, but I didn't care. I just wanted to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but it was gone, or maybe just blended into the shadows of the field. I didn't stop to check. I kept driving, faster than I should have been on that road. I drove for maybe a mile, maybe two, my heart still hammering in my chest, still feeling that icy dread in my gut. And that's when I saw it, in the sky. I was still looking in the rearview mirror, glancing back every few seconds, half expecting to see something chasing me, when something else caught my eye. Up ahead and to the side, over the fields, away from the road, up in the sky. It was a light, but not like a plane light, not blinking, not moving fast, just there. I slowed down again, cautiously this time, pulling over to the side of the road, engine idling. I peered up into the sky, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was still twilight, but getting darker fast, and up there, maybe half a mile off the road over the fields, hanging in the air, was this thing. It was grey, oval-shaped, silent, just hovering, 10, 15 feet above the ground, maybe. Not high up, almost. Hidden, like it was trying to stay out of sight, but not quite succeeding. It wasn't blinking, no lights flashing, just this solid grey oval shape against the darkening sky. I stared at it, dumbfounded. What the hell was that? A plane? No plane looks like that. Helicopter? Maybe, but it was too smooth, too featureless, and silent, completely silent. No engine noise, no whirring blades, nothing. Just silence. And this thing, hanging in the air. And then it hit me. Bigfoot. And this. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, on a lonely Montana road, within minutes of each other. What were the chances? What the hell was going on? A shiver ran down my spine, colder than the February air. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something else. Confusion, disbelief, a growing sense of unease that something was fundamentally wrong, that reality itself had tilted somehow. I looked back and forth between where I'd seen the creature, in the field, and the object, hanging in the sky. They were maybe half a mile apart, if that. Both out there in the same stretch of empty Montana countryside, in the same few minutes of twilight. Were they connected? Could they be? It sounded crazy, even to me thinking it. Monster in the woods and flying saucer in the sky. It sounded like something out of a cheap sci-fi movie, but I'd seen them both, with my own eyes. There was no denying it. The grey object just hung there, silent and still. I watched it for what felt like a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, trying to make sense of it, trying to find some explanation, any explanation that wasn't crazy. But there wasn't one. There was just this unbelievable, impossible thing hovering in the sky. And then, just as suddenly as I'd noticed it, it was gone. 1 minute it was there, the next, just empty sky, vanished. No sound, no movement, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. I sat there in my truck, engine idling, staring at the empty sky where the object had been. The twilight was almost gone now, full dark, settling in. The only sound was the rumble of my truck's engine and the wind whistling through the bare trees in the distance. I sat there for a long time, I don't know how long, just frozen, trying to process what I'd seen, trying to figure out what it meant. But there was no figuring it out. There was no explanation that made any sense. Finally, the cold started to seep into the cab, reminding me where I was. I shook my head, put the truck back in gear, and started driving again. East, away from there, away from the field, away from the sky, away from whatever the hell that was. I drove all night, straight through, didn't stop until sunrise, just kept going, putting mile after mile between me and that place. And even then, I couldn't shake it, couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the feeling that I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see, something that changed things. I've never told anyone about this, not really. Not the whole story anyway. A few times, over beers maybe, I've hinted at seeing something strange out in Montana. But I always brushed it off, laughed it off, made it sound like I was joking. Because who would believe it? Bigfoot and a UFO in one night? It sounds insane. But it happened. I know what I saw. I felt the fear, the cold, the smell. I saw the shape in the field and the object in the sky. And I've never been able to explain it, never been able to make sense of it. To this day, whenever I drive through Montana, especially in winter, especially around Great Falls, I get a shiver. I glance out at the fields, at the sky, and I remember that night, that cold February evening in '76, when I saw something I still can't understand, something that I don't know. It just happened. And then it was gone. And I was left wondering, what was that all about? And I still am. I still am wondering. Story 12. We were just enjoying a simple walk, you know. February in Pennsylvania is always a gamble weather-wise. This day, it was that heavy, grey kind of sky, the kind that threatens snow but never really delivers. Me and Martha, we'd been friends since, well, forever, it feels like. We're both not as spry as we used to be, but we still try to get out and about. Keeps the joints from seizing up, Martha always says. Settlers Park is close by, and it's usually peaceful. Nice, easy trails, nothing too strenuous for our old bones. We set off around maybe 4 in the afternoon. It was already getting that pre-dusk dimness, the kind that makes the woods feel different, a bit more closed in. The air was damp, and you could smell that earthy, wet leaves smell mixed with pine needles. It was quiet, too, that deep woods quiet, where the only sounds are the rustle of the wind in the bare branches and maybe a bird calling out in the distance. We were talking about, I can't even remember what, probably something mundane, grocery prices, or the latest gossip from church. Normal stuff. We were on one of the lower trails, the one that loops around that little creek. It's an easy path, mostly flat. We rounded a bend, nothing sharp, just a gentle curve to the left, and that's when it happened. I stopped dead in my tracks, and I know Martha did too because I heard her gasp right beside me, right there, in the middle of the path, standing. It was huge. I mean, pictures of Bigfoot, you see them sometimes in those magazines at the grocery store, but they never really prepare you for the real thing. This was enormous, 7, 8 feet tall, easily, towering. It just stood there, blocking the path completely. It was covered in hair, not like animal fur, soft and flowing. This was matted, dark, greasy-looking, like it hadn't been cleaned in years. It hung in clumps and it was everywhere, head to toe, completely covered. No skin showing anywhere except maybe, I don't even know if it was skin really. The arms, they were too long. They hung down past its knees, long and thick, and they ended in hands, but not like human hands, claws. I saw them clearly, long, curved and sharp, like something out of a nightmare. Not fingernails, but real claws. And the face. God, the face. I don't think I'll ever forget that face as long as I live. It wasn't like an animal face. It was almost human, but twisted, deformed. The skin, it was leathery, wrinkled, hanging loose like it was too big for its skull. It drooped down over its eyes, not completely, but enough that it made its eyes seem shadowed, hidden. You could still see them, though, just glimmers, dark and intense. Then the ears, or what should have been ears. They weren't ears. They were bumps. Lumpy, fleshy things sticking out of the sides of its head where ears should be. No shape to them, just protrusions. Wrong. Completely wrong. And in the center of its forehead there was this dent, like someone had taken a hammer and smashed it right in the middle of its forehead. A deep, unnatural dip in its skull. It wasn't bleeding or anything, but it was there. Prominent. Freakish. It made the whole face even more off. It just stood there, staring at us, not moving, just looking. And the dread that washed over me. It was physical, like a wave of ice water hitting you, but colder, deeper. It wasn't just fear, it was something ancient, something primal, like my body, my instincts were screaming that I was in danger, mortal danger. Martha let out this little whimper beside me, and I felt my own breath catch in my throat. We just froze, staring at it. It stared back. There wasn't any sound, just the wind in the trees and our ragged breathing, and the presence of that thing. It filled the air. I remember feeling this overwhelming urge to run. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to turn and run, but my legs felt like lead, frozen. I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at that creature. It tilted its head, just slightly, like it was curious, or maybe assessing us. I don't know. I didn't understand it then, and I don't understand it now. What was it doing? What was it thinking? Was it even thinking? Then a sound, a low growl, grunt. It was guttural, deep in its chest. It rumbled through the air, and I felt it in my chest too. Vibration, fear. It wasn't loud, not like a bear's roar or anything. It was quieter, but somehow even more menacing, because it was so unnatural. That sound, that was what broke the spell. Something in me snapped, and the paralysis lifted. I grabbed Martha's arm. I don't even remember consciously doing it. It was pure instinct, and I yanked her back, hard. "Run!" I hissed at her. That's all I could get out, just run. And we did. We turned, and we ran. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. Not even when I was a kid. Adrenaline, pure terror. It just propelled me. Martha was right behind me, wheezing, but running. We didn't look back. We just ran. We crashed through the undergrowth, stumbling over roots, branches whipping at our faces. I could hear Martha gasping for breath, her shoes crunching on the leaves behind me. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, so loud it was almost deafening. And the sound of my own panicked breathing. Behind us, nothing. I didn't hear it chasing us. I didn't hear anything except the sounds of the forest and our desperate flight. But I could feel it. I could feel that presence behind us, like it was still there, watching, letting us go, playing with us. I don't know. I just felt it. All the way back to the park entrance. We burst out of the trees and onto the park road. We didn't stop running until we reached Martha's car. We scrambled inside, locked the doors, and just sat there, gasping for air, shaking like leaves. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Just sat there, trying to catch our breath, our hearts hammering in our chests. Finally, Martha looked at me. Her face was white as a sheet, her eyes wide and staring. Did you see that?" she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "I saw it," I managed to choke out. My voice was hoarse. "I saw it." We just sat there in silence again for a few minutes, trying to process what we'd just seen. It felt unreal, like a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. We both saw it. We both felt it. that raw, terrifying fear. Then I remembered the news from last night. The radio had been full of it this morning. People talking about seeing something in the sky over Oakdale. Strange lights, moving too fast to be airplanes. UFOs, they were calling them. And then the power outage. Whole sections of town went dark for a while last night. Nobody could explain it. Just went out, came back on after a bit. We just brushed it off, thought it was just a glitch in the system, you know. But now it felt different. Now it felt connected. That thing in the woods, the UFOs, the power outage. It felt like something else was going on, something bigger, something we didn't understand. I told Martha about it, about the UFO reports, the power outage. She remembered too. She'd heard it on the news as well. And suddenly the pieces clicked into place in a horrifying kind of way. Could it be? Martha started to say, but she trailed off. She didn't want to say it out loud, neither did I. But we both knew what we were thinking. That thing in the woods. It wasn't just some animal. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't anything we knew. It was something else. Something alien. The thought sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. Alien. It sounded crazy. But what else could it be? That height, that face, those claws, the unnaturalness of it all. And then the UFOs, the power outage. It all pointed to something beyond our understanding. Something not earthly. We drove home in silence, both lost in our own thoughts, replaying the encounter over and over in our minds. Trying to make sense of it, trying to find some explanation that didn't involve aliens. But there wasn't one. Not a believable one, anyway. When I got home, I told my husband Tom about it. He's always been a practical man, down to earth. He listened to me, listened to Martha when I called her and put her on the phone too, and he just didn't know what to say. He didn't dismiss us, didn't laugh. He could see how shaken we were. He knew we'd seen something real, but he couldn't explain it either. He just shook his head and said, "Well, I don't know, Mary. I just don't know." And that was that. We told a few other people, close friends, people we trusted. Some of them believed us. Some of them, well, they didn't say anything, but you could see it in their eyes. They thought we were losing it. Old women imagining things in the woods. But we knew what we saw. We knew what we felt. And it wasn't imagination. It was real. Terrifyingly real. To this day, I can still see it. That face, those eyes, those claws, the sheer wrongness of it. And I still think about the UFOs, the power outage. What was going on that day in Oakdale? What was that thing? Where did it come from? What did it want? I have no answers, just the memory, the fear, and the unsettling feeling that we stumbled onto something we were never meant to see, something not from this world. And I can't shake the feeling even now, all these years later, that it's still out there, somewhere, watching. Story 13. I still can't really talk about it, not properly. It's been decades, right? 1976. That's a long time ago. But sometimes, especially when I can't sleep and the house is dead quiet, it comes back like it was yesterday, April 4th. That date's just burned into me. I was 16, living with my folks in Helena, Montana. We had this old farmhouse a little outside of town. Big piece of land behind it, mostly pasture, all the way back to the woods. Beautiful in the daytime, especially in the summer, but early mornings before the sun really got going, it could be, I don't know, just empty, cold. I woke up way too early that day, like still properly dark outside, but that heavy kind of dark you get just before dawn starts thinking about showing up. My room faced east, overlooked that pasture. I remember just lying there, staring at the window without really seeing anything. You know how it is when you first wake up and your head's still all fuzzy? Then something just pulled me, like a tug, right in my gut. I sat up in bed, leaned forward. The window was open a crack and I could hear nothing, just absolute quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Usually even that early you'd hear something. Cows lowing from the neighbor's place maybe, or birds starting to chirp. But nothing. Just this thick, still quiet that felt heavy. I got out of bed, went to the window. The floorboards were freezing cold on my bare feet, which always annoyed my mom when I did that. But I just didn't care then. I pulled back the curtain a little, just a sliver, and looked out. The pasture was grey. That weird pre-dawn grey where everything looks flat and kind of blurry. You know the colour, I mean. Like the world hasn't decided what colours it's going to be yet. It was like looking at an old black and white photo that's faded a bit. And it was empty. Just that big field stretching out to the trees at the far edge. Nothing moving, nothing at all. I stood there, just looking. I don't know how long, maybe 5 minutes, maybe longer. Time felt weird. Then I saw it. It was way out by the trees, at the very edge of the pasture. Just there, like it had just stepped out of the woods. And at first, in that grey light, I couldn't quite make out what it was. Just a dark shape. Tall, though. Way too tall to be a person. Too bulky. I squinted, leaned closer to the glass, and then it moved. It stepped forward, out into the pasture, and started walking. Slowly, deliberately. And as it moved, I started to see what it was. It was hairy, completely covered in dark hair, shaggy, matted-looking hair, and huge, massive, like impossibly big. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen, not a bear, not a cow, nothing like that. It was upright, walking on 2 legs, like a man, but wrong, so wrong. I remember thinking, just for a split second, maybe it was a person in some kind of costume. But even as the thought flickered through my head, I knew it was ridiculous. No person could be that big, that bulky. And the way it moved was different, smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking, and silent, absolutely silent. Even from that distance you usually hear something, even the soft crunch of feet on dry grass. But there was nothing, just that shape, moving across the pasture and the dead quiet of the morning. I could see its head now, big, round, swiveling from side to side as it walked. It looked neckless, like its head just sat right on top of its shoulders. And the hair, it was everywhere, even on its face as far as I could tell in that dim light, just dark, shaggy hair. Then another one came out of the trees, a little smaller maybe, but just as hairy, just as wrong. They were the same color, the same shape, the same impossible size, 2 of them walking in the empty pasture in the pre-dawn light. I just stood there, frozen, staring. I felt like my blood had turned to ice water. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it shaking my whole body, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly, I don't think, just watching. The bigger one, the first one, it stopped in the middle of the pasture, and it bent down, just folded at the waist, easy as you please, and reached down to the ground. I couldn't see what it was doing at first, the light was still so bad. And then it straightened up, and it was holding something dark and bulky, shaped kind of like a hay bale, I guess, but darker, and something was flapping from the ends of it. Dark, loose things, hanging down and flapping in the non-existent breeze. It was weird, really weird. It held this thing for a second, then turned to the smaller one, and it handed it over, just reached out and passed it to the smaller creature, and the smaller one took it, like it was nothing, like it weighed absolutely nothing at all. This huge, bulky thing, like a hay bale, and it just took it and stood there holding it. No strain, no effort, just took it. That's when the really bad fear hit me. Before that it was shock, confusion, disbelief, but seeing the size of them, the way they moved, the way they handled this thing, it just hit me, all at once, this cold, sick dread. These weren't people. They weren't animals I knew. They were something else, something wrong. And then the bigger one started walking again. But this time it wasn't walking across the pasture. It was walking straight towards the house, straight towards my window. It was still silent, still gliding, but it was coming closer, closer and closer. And as it walked, its head, it turned, slowly, deliberately, upwards. And it looked right at my window. I swear to God, it looked right at me. I couldn't see its face clearly, not really, just that dark shape, the shaggy hair. But I could see its eyes. Dark, solid dark. And they were focused, fixed on my window, on me. It was like it knew I was there. It knew I was watching. And it was looking back. That's when I broke. Just completely broke. Something in me just snapped. All that frozen terror, it just shattered, and all that was left was pure, blind panic. I turned away from the window, stumbled back, tripped over my own feet, nearly fell. But I scrambled up and ran. Just ran out of my room, out into the hallway, yelling for my dad. "Dad! Dad! Wake up! Dad, there's something outside. Something big." I was shouting, yelling, my voice cracking. My dad's room was just down the hall. I hammered on his door, banging and screaming. He's a heavy sleeper, my dad. Usually you could set off a bomb next to him, and he'd just roll over and grumble. But this time, maybe it was the way I was yelling, maybe it was just something in my voice. He was awake almost instantly. The door flew open, and he was standing there in his underwear, blinking, his hair all messed up, looking completely confused. "Robert? What the hell? What's wrong?" "Dad, come on. Come to my room. There's something outside, in the pasture. You got to see it." I grabbed his arm, started pulling him down the hallway. He was still half asleep, still trying to figure out what was going on. "Robert, slow down. What are you talking about? What's in the pasture? Just come on, you have to see it. I don't know what it is, Dad, but it's huge and hairy, and there's two of them." I dragged him into my room, over to the window. I was pointing, my hand shaking so bad I could barely aim. "Out there in the pasture, see them?" He rubbed his eyes, squinted, looked out at the pasture, and then he just froze. Just like I had, stiff as a board, staring. He stood there for a long, long time, just staring out at the empty pasture. The light was getting a little better now, the sky in the east starting to turn that soft, pale pink color. But the pasture was empty, completely, utterly empty. No dark shapes, no huge, hairy figures, no flapping thing, nothing, just empty grass and the faint line of trees at the edge. He kept staring. His face was, I don't know, white as a sheet. His mouth was open a little, like he was trying to say something but couldn't get the words out. Finally, after what felt like forever, he turned to me. His voice was quiet, hoarse. "Robert, what did you see?" I tried to explain. I told him everything, about waking up, about the quiet, about seeing the first one come out of the trees, then the second one, about the thing they were carrying, about them walking towards the house, about the bigger one looking at me. Everything. I talked fast, stumbling over words, my voice still shaking. He just listened, not interrupting, not saying anything, just listening. And when I was done, he was quiet again for a long time. Then he said, "Show me where." We went downstairs. He grabbed his shotgun from the gun cabinet. He always kept it loaded just in case, and we went out the back door. It was still cold out, that biting early morning cold that goes right through you. The ground was damp and soft under our feet. We walked out to the pasture, following the direction I'd seen them in. My dad was walking ahead, the shotgun held loosely in his hands, scanning the field, his eyes sharp and worried. I was right behind him, my heart still hammering, still expecting. I don't know what. To see them again? To see something? But there was nothing. Just the pasture, the grass, wet with dew, the soft earth. Nothing else. We walked all the way to the edge of the woods, where I'd first seen them come out. Nothing. No broken branches, no disturbed grass, no anything to show that anything had been there at all. My dad kept looking around, his eyes narrowed. He was a hunter, my dad. He knew how to track animals, how to see signs in the woods and fields that most people would miss. He was looking for something, anything. And then he stopped. He was staring down at the ground. "Robert, come here." I went over to him. He was pointing at the ground, at the soft earth near the edge of the trees. And there it was, a footprint. Not like any footprint I'd ever seen. Gigantic, longer than my dad's forearm, wide, and 3 toes. 3 huge, thick toes splayed out in the soft mud. It was clear, sharp, like it had been pressed into the earth just a few minutes ago. It was undeniable. My dad just stared at it. Then he looked up, out at the empty pasture, then back down at the footprint. He ran his hand over his face, breathed out hard. "Jesus Christ," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Jesus Christ, Robert, what the hell was that?" We spent the rest of the morning out there, searching the pasture, searching the wood's edge. We found more footprints. Not many, just a few, scattered around. But they were all the same, huge, 3-toed, impossible. The biggest one we found was right near where I said I'd seen them standing, in the middle of the pasture. My dad measured it, 17.5 inches long. He couldn't believe it. He kept shaking his head, staring at it, like he was trying to make sense of something that just didn't make any sense at all. He called the sheriff later that morning. 2 deputies came out. Older guys, seen it all, probably thought we were crazy before they even got here. My dad told them the story, showed them the footprints. They listened. They looked at the footprints. They walked around. They took pictures. And then they talked to me, separately, asking questions, trying to catch me out, I guess, to see if I was making it up, but I wasn't. I told them exactly what I'd seen, everything, just like I told my dad, and I could see, as I was talking, that they were starting to change. Their faces got more serious. They stopped looking at each other and started looking at me, really looking. One of them, the older one, he said to my dad after they'd talked to me, "Frank, your boy, he's genuinely terrified. I've seen real fear before. And that boy is scared to death. And he's sticking to his story. Every detail's the same. It's consistent." The other deputy, younger guy, he chimed in. "And those footprints. Frank, those ain't deer tracks. Those ain't bear tracks. I don't know what the hell made those tracks, but they're real." They left eventually, shook their heads, climbed back in their patrol car, drove away, said they'd file a report, said they'd keep an eye out. But I knew, and my dad knew, they didn't believe us. Not really. They were concerned, maybe, but they didn't know what to make of it, just like we didn't. That was it. That was the whole thing. They were just gone, vanished, like they'd never been there, except for the footprints and the feeling. That's the thing that stays with me, even now. The feeling, that cold, sick dread, the feeling of being watched, the feeling that something big, something unknown and terrifying was out there, right there, just outside my window, and it saw me. I still look out the window sometimes early in the morning, even now living here in a different place, different state, different life, and I still get that little shiver down my spine when it's quiet and grey and the light's just starting to come. Because for a long time after that, every time I looked out at the pasture in the early morning, I expected to see them again, standing there at the edge of the trees, waiting. I never did, thank God. But I still wonder, what were they? What were they carrying? Where did they go? And why were they walking towards the house? I've tried to make sense of it all these years, read books, looked stuff up online, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. People say they're out there, in the woods, in the mountains, but in the pasture, so close to the house. And 2 of them, carrying whatever that thing was. It doesn't make any sense. It still scares the hell out of me when I think about it too much. And I don't talk about it, not really. People just look at you funny, think you're crazy, or lying. but I know what I saw. I saw them. April 4th, 1976. And I'll never forget it. Never. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, and I'm right back there in my room, staring out the window at that grey, empty pasture, waiting for them to come out of the trees again. And I don't know what I'd do if I ever saw them again. I really don't. Story 14. Okay, so this is gonna sound crazy. I know it does, even to me still, and it happened months ago now. But I can't shake it, you know. It's always there in the back of my head, like a bad taste you can't get rid of. I've been reading some stuff online, and I thought maybe if I just write it out, just tell someone, anyone, maybe it'll help. I don't know. I run a small farm, always have. Generations back in my family, the same land. It's not fancy, it's work. Hard work most days, but it's my life. This happened early September, right after we'd started pulling in the corn, and the air was starting to get that edge of fall in it. You know, the days are still warmish, but the mornings and evenings get a little bite to them. It's usually a beautiful time of year, the best time, really. But this year, well, this year was different. For weeks before it happened, maybe even a month, there had been this smell in the woods bordering the back fields. Just a section of woods, down by the creek, the far corner of the property. It was foul, like something dead, rotting, but not quite like a normal animal carcass smell. More pungent and almost sickly sweet mixed in with it. I couldn't put my finger on it. My wife, Sarah, she smelled it too. We'd talk about it sometimes at dinner, try to figure out what it was. We figured maybe a deer had died back in there, something like that. Woods are woods, things happen. We didn't think too much of it, just kind of made a note to maybe walk back there when we had a spare minute, see if we could find anything and drag it out if it was an animal, you know, to get rid of the smell. But farm life, spare minutes are rare as hen's teeth. So we just kept putting it off, hoping whatever it was would just decompose and go away on its own. Then there were the sounds. This started around the same time as the smell, maybe a bit after. I'd be out in the fields, early morning or late evening when it was quiet, and I'd hear this bellow. That's the only word for it. A deep, throaty bellow. At first I thought it was cattle from Mr. Henderson's place down the road. They sometimes get out of their fences. But it didn't sound quite like cattle. It was lower, deeper, and angrier somehow, more pain in it, like a bull, but a bull in real distress, you know, like something was hurting it bad. And the way it echoed through the woods, it just felt wrong. It wasn't a sound that belonged out there. It wasn't natural. I'd hear it maybe once or twice a week, never during the day, only when it was getting dim or dark. It would just boom out of the woods, this awful guttural cry, then stop. Silence for a while, then maybe another one, maybe not. Sarah heard it a few times too when she was out in the garden behind the house. We started joking, nervous jokes mostly, about maybe it was some kind of monster in the woods, laughing it off, but the sound and that smell, they were starting to get under my skin. That day, though, the day it all happened, it started like any other. Up before dawn, coffee, check the animals, get the day started. I was working on the east field that morning, the one that backs right up to the woods where the smell and the sound had been coming from. Sun was up good by then, maybe mid-morning, getting a little hot already, even for early September. I was on the tractor, ploughing, just going back and forth, minding my own business, thinking about getting the harvest in, maybe needing to fix that fence line next week, normal farm stuff. My dog Buster, he was with me, like he always is. Old German Shepherd, getting grey around the muzzle now, but still thinks he's a pup. Buster is usually pretty chill, just trots along behind the tractor, keeps me company. But he's a farm dog through and through. He knows his job, and he's fiercely protective of the property, and especially of Sarah and me. If anything is out of place, Buster knows it, and he lets you know it too. Anyway, I was on the tractor, maybe halfway through the field, and Buster started acting weird. He perked up, ears straight, head cocked, looking towards the woods line. He let out a low growl, the kind he does when he's not sure what he's looking at, but knows it's something he doesn't like. I cut the engine, just to hear better. It was quiet, just birds chirping, the wind rustling in the trees, the usual sounds. "What is it, boy?" I asked him. He didn't look at me, just kept staring into the woods, growling under his breath. Then I heard it, the bellow. But this time it was different. It wasn't far off in the distance, echoing. It was close, very close, like right at the edge of the woods, maybe just inside. It was louder, more intense than I'd ever heard it before. And this time, it wasn't just a bellow. It was mixed with something else, a kind of snarl, a low, rumbling growl underneath the bellow. It was terrifying, pure, raw animal rage and pain mixed together. Buster went ballistic. He wasn't growling anymore. He was barking, full-on, loud, aggressive barks. He took off like a shot, charging straight towards the woods, barking his head off. I jumped off the tractor, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what was going on, but whatever was making that sound, it was right there, just a few yards into the trees. I ran after Buster, yelling at him to come back, but he wasn't listening. He was in full protect mode. I reached the edge of the field, at the tree line, and I could smell it then, stronger than ever, that putrid, awful smell. It was thick in the air, like a wall you could walk into. It was coming from right there, in the woods, where Buster was heading. I pushed past the first trees, branches scratching at my face, and then I saw it. Jesus Christ, I saw it. It was standing there, just a little ways into the woods, maybe 10, 15 feet in. It was huge. Taller than any man, taller than anything I've ever seen standing on two legs. Easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. Covered head to toe in dark hair, black or maybe very dark brown, thick, matted hair. It was hunched over slightly, but even hunched it was massive. Its back was broad, shoulders like a bull, arms long, hanging down almost to its knees. And the smell. God. The smell was overpowering. It hit me like a physical blow, making my eyes water and my stomach churn. It was making that bellowing sound, the sound I'd heard before, but seeing it, seeing where it was coming from, made it 1,000 times more horrifying. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was coming from this thing, this creature, this monster. Buster was right there, at its feet, barking, snapping, trying to bite at it. He was going crazy, fearless as always. I kept yelling at him to get back, but he wasn't listening. He jumped up, and I saw him sink his teeth into the creature's leg, the back of its thigh. I saw him bite hard, saw his teeth sink into that dark hair. And the creature, it barely even reacted. It didn't jump, didn't yell, didn't even flinch. It just looked down at Buster, slowly, turned its head, and looked down at my dog like he was nothing. Like he was an ant crawling on the ground. That's when I saw its face, or what I could see of it under all that hair. It was human-like in a way, but not human. The brow was heavy, jutting out, and the eyes, I only got a glimpse of them, but they were dark, deep-set and empty, cold. There was nothing behind them, no intelligence, no anger, no anything that I could read, just nothing. Empty black pits staring out from under that hairy brow. And then it did something that just made my blood run cold. It didn't yell at Buster, didn't try to kick him or anything. It reached down, slowly, deliberately. Its arm was huge, thick as my thigh, covered in that same dark hair. It reached down and just swatted Buster away, like you'd swat a fly. Like Buster was nothing more than a buzzing insect irritating it. Just a casual backhand swipe with its massive arm, and Buster went flying, literally flying. He yelped, a sharp, hurt yelp, and went tumbling backwards through the air, landing hard a few feet away, yelping again, this time in pain and fear. The creature didn't even watch him land. It just turned its head back towards, I don't know, towards the trees, or maybe just into the woods, away from me. It started to move, slowly, lumbering deeper into the trees. It was just leaving. Like nothing had happened, like a dog biting it, like swatting the dog away was just the most normal, everyday thing in the world. I was frozen, just standing there staring, watching it disappear into the trees. The smell was still heavy in the air, and the sound, that low growling bellow, was fading as it moved away. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, paralyzed by, I don't even know what. Fear, disbelief, horror, all of it maybe. Then I remembered Buster. I ran to him, knelt down, checking him over. He was whimpering, licking his paw. He seemed okay, not broken or anything, just shaken up, scared and probably bruised all over. I checked him for blood, for bites, anything. He was mostly just dirty and shaken. That's when I noticed it. On Buster's fur and on my own shirt, right on the front where I'd been running through the branches. Little spots of wetness, slick, glistening spots. Saliva. It must have splashed when the creature swatted Buster, flung some saliva through the air. And it stank. God, it stank. That same awful putrid smell, but concentrated, stronger than ever. It was on Buster, on my shirt, and in the air around us. That smell from the woods, that awful, rotting, sickly, sweet smell. It was coming from this thing, from its saliva. I got Buster back to the house. Sarah came running out when she saw us, saw Buster limping, saw the look on my face. I didn't even try to explain right away, just got Buster inside, checked him over properly. Sarah cleaned him up, looked at his paw. Just a sprain, thankfully, nothing broken. But he was terrified. He wouldn't leave my side, just whimpered and trembled, even inside the house, safe. Buster is never scared, never. To see him like that, it just made it all feel even more real, more terrifying. Then I told Sarah everything. About the sound, the smell, and what I saw. The creature, the size of it, the smell, the way it just swatted Buster away like he was nothing. The saliva. She looked at me like I was crazy. I know it sounds crazy. Even now, writing it down, it sounds like some kind of fever dream. But it happened. I saw it. I smelled it. Buster got hurt by it. It was real. We went back out later, Sarah and me, with Buster limping along behind us. We went to the edge of the woods, to where it happened. The smell was still there, strong, clinging to the air. We could see where Buster had been barking, where he'd been swatted away, trampled grass, broken branches. There were no tracks, nothing clear, just disturbed ground. But the smell was undeniable, and it was the same smell we'd been noticing in the woods for weeks. We didn't go into the woods, not further than the edge. We just stood there, looking in, listening. It was silent, just the wind in the trees, birds chirping, but the woods, they felt different now, wrong, darker somehow, like something was watching us from inside, something unseen, something monstrous. We went back to the house, and we locked all the doors, bolted them shut, even in the middle of the day. We stayed inside all afternoon, all evening, just listening. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside made us jump. Buster stayed by my feet, whining softly. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. That huge, hairy shape, those dark, empty eyes, the way it swatted Buster away. The smell. I could still smell it, even inside the house, on my shirt, on Buster. I changed my shirt, washed my hands a dozen times, but the smell, it lingered, like it had gotten into my skin, into my nostrils, into my mind. And then I heard it again, late at night, when everything was quiet, dead quiet outside, the bellow. But this time, it was different again. Not as loud as before, not as close, but deeper, sadder almost. A long, drawn-out bellow that echoed through the woods and then faded away. Just once. Then silence. I haven't heard it since. Not the bellow, not the growl, not anything. And the smell. It's gone now, mostly. You can still catch a faint whiff of it sometimes if the wind is blowing the right way from the woods, but it's not as strong, not as constant. But it's still there. The fear, the unease. Every time I go out to the fields, especially the east field, the one by the woods, I look over my shoulder. I listen. Buster still won't go near the woods line. He gets tense, starts growling, even from far away. He knows, he remembers. I don't know what it was, I don't know what to make of it. Bigfoot, monster, some kind of bear, but no bear smells like that, or stands like that, or swats a dog like that. And that sound, I've lived around animals my whole life, farm animals, wild animals, everything. I've never heard anything like that sound, never seen anything like that thing. And the worst part is, I don't understand it. Why was it there? What was it doing? Why did it just leave? What was that smell? What were those eyes? It just happened. And then it was gone. But it changed everything. I can't look at those woods the same way anymore. I can't go out in the fields, especially at dusk, without feeling watched. Like something is still out there, lurking, unseen, unknown, just beyond the trees. And that smell, sometimes even now, months later, I think I can still smell it. Faint, but there. A reminder. A nightmare I can't wake up from, and I don't know what to do about it. I just don't know. Story 15. Okay, I still can't really wrap my head around it, even after all these years. It's something that sticks with you, you know? Like a stain. Not a physical stain, but something dirties your mind. People tell me to forget about it, laugh it off. City cops sure did. Animal control, too. Some damn fool in a gorilla suit, they said. Yeah, right. A gorilla suit that stinks like death warmed over and is taller than my pickup truck. Real funny guys they were, sitting behind their desks in their clean shirts, never seen a daybreak in their life, let alone something like that. It was February 77, cold for Florida, you know, that kind of chill that gets right into your bones even before the sun thinks about coming up. I was working as the superintendent at the Palm Vista Golf Course, just west of Delray. Beautiful place, really, during the day. Manicured greens, those fakey little hills they call features for the rich guys to pretend they're challenging Everest. You know the type. But before dawn it was different. It was still. Dead quiet except for maybe crickets, and even they sounded muffled. February in Florida is weird like that, holds its breath. Every morning, same routine. Up at ass-crack o'clock, even before the sky started thinking about getting light. Gotta check the greens, make sure the sprinklers did their job, check for any vandalism. Kids sometimes got it into their heads to mess around late at night. Though Palm Vista was pretty far out, not much to attract them except rich people's hedges to pee on. Hop in the pickup, the old Ford I had then, rattle-trap but reliable, always started even in that weird cold. That morning everything felt heavier than usual. Not just the air, which was damp like February air always is, but something else. A weight in the quiet. Like something big was holding its breath too. I remember thinking, Christ, going to be a long day. Just one of those feelings you get. Ignored it, of course. Just cranked the radio to some scratchy country station, trying to shake off the weird mood. I started my rounds, headlights cutting through the dark, bouncing off the dew-soaked grass. First tee, nothing. Second tee, that's where the little water hazard is. More of a pond, really, for decoration. Fancy name for a mud puddle, but the guys who built Palm Vista thought it sounded classy. Anyways, I was coming up to the second tee, slow in the truck, just scanning, half asleep still, even with the coffee I'd gulped down at home. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear. Florida has bears, not many around Delray, but they're there. Sometimes wander out from the Everglades further west, but bears are bulky, kinda low to the ground. This was tall, towering tall, standing right at the edge of the water hazard, just standing there, like it was thinking about taking a drink, or maybe just looking at its reflection. I don't know. Animals do weird stuff. But even in the dim headlight spill, I knew instantly it wasn't a bear. Way too tall, way too wrong. And then the smell hit me. God, that smell. I swear I can smell it right now just thinking about it. It was like rotting meat, but mixed with something else, something acrid, sharp, almost chemical, but natural at the same time. Like if you took all the worst smells you could imagine, sewer gas and roadkill and dirty diapers and stale sweat, and let them fester in the sun for a week, and then amplified it 100 times. It wasn't just bad, it was sickening, made my stomach heave just breathing it in. I almost gagged, actually, started coughing and trying to hold my breath at the same time, which you can imagine doesn't work too well. That smell, that's what really froze me. It was so overpowering, so wrong, that it punched through the sleepy fog in my brain and slammed me awake. That's when I really saw it. It was facing away from me mostly, just standing there, kind of hunched forward, shoulders broad as a damn doorway, covered in hair, long, shaggy hair, blacker than the pre-dawn sky, blacker than shadows. It looked powerful, impossibly powerful, like all muscle and bone and raw strength packed into that one shape. And it was huge, bigger than anything I'd ever seen, even on TV or in the zoo. The way it stood, kind of slumped but still reaching up, I'd guess 7 feet easy, maybe more, and thick, not fat, but just massive. My first thought, after the bear idea went out the window, was maybe some crazy homeless guy. But even that didn't make sense. No clothes, just this thick mat of hair, and the smell. No human being could smell like that, right? And the size. No, it wasn't human. Not like any human I'd ever seen. My heart started hammering against my ribs, thump, thump, thump so loud I could hear it over the rattling engine of the truck. Hands sweating, even in the cold. I should have backed up, I know that now. Should have just put the truck in reverse, slammed the gas, and got the hell out of there. Gone back to the shed, called the cops from there, from safety. But I didn't. Stupid curiosity, maybe, or just plain shock. I was frozen, just sat there staring, like a rabbit caught in headlights, only these weren't the headlights of some car. These were its headlights, whatever the hell it was. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, my instinct kicked in. Not fight or flight, but illumination. Stupid, I know, but in that split second all I could think of was to get a better look. Like turning on the lights would somehow make sense of it, so I did. Flipped the high beams on. Bam! White light flooded the clearing, washing out the shadows, hitting that thing full in the face, and that's when it turned its head. Slowly, like it was heavy, or like it was just not in a hurry, like it owned the night, owned the golf course, owned everything. It turned its head and its eyes. Jesus, its eyes. They weren't just eyes, they were reflectors, glowed in the light. Not like animal eyes sometimes do, a soft reflection. These were like burning coals, deep, deep red, glowing from inside. They caught the headlights and threw them back, hard, like angry sparks. And they were intelligent. That's the part that really freaks me out still. They weren't just animal eyes, blank and staring. They were looking at me, seeing me. There was something thinking behind those eyes, something old and dark and knowing. And it didn't like me. I could feel it. Feel its dislike burning through the air, hot as that stench. It just stared at me for another few seconds, those red eyes locked on mine. No expression, not really, just looking. And then, slow and deliberate, it turned away from the water, away from me, and moved towards the woods. It didn't run, didn't even hurry, just lumbered, big, heavy steps. The ground seemed to rumble a little as it walked. Branches cracked, bushes rustled as it pushed through them, but it wasn't loud, not really. More like the woods were swallowing it up, accepting it back into the darkness. It moved with a kind of silent power, like it belonged there, like it was the darkness itself. And then it was gone, just vanished into the trees. 1 minute it was there, massive and real as a heart attack. The next, nothing. Just shadows and the cold morning air, and that stink still hanging thick and heavy. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel, legs like jelly. I just sat there in the truck, engine still running, headlights still blasting into the empty space where it had been. Breathing hard, chest tight, that smell still choking me. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes maybe. Time felt all blurry and stretched out. Finally, I forced myself to breathe deep, slow breaths, tried to calm down. "Okay," I said out loud to myself, my voice cracking. "Okay, just okay." I put the truck in gear, real slow this time, and edged forward. Stopped at the edge of the woods where it had disappeared. Just trees and shadows, smelled like pine and damp earth, and still that stink, lingering like a bad dream. I wanted to see something. Footprints, maybe? Broken branches? Something to prove to myself that I hadn't just imagined the whole damn thing, that I wasn't losing my mind. But there was nothing. Grass was trampled a bit by the water's edge, where it had been standing. But no clear footprints, not really. Just depressions in the dew-covered grass. And the woods. Just woods. Dark and silent and closed. Then, for some stupid reason, I got this idea. Bananas. Don't ask me why bananas. I'd seen it in some old movie once, Tarzan maybe, where they used bananas to lure monkeys. Stupid, I know. Like this thing was some kind of overgrown monkey. But my brain wasn't working right, still fried from the shock and the smell and those red eyes. So I had bananas in the truck, always kept some for a quick breakfast. Peel one, toss the peel out the window. Yeah, I know, littering, shoot me. Eat the banana while I check the sprinklers. Habit. Grabbed the bunch of bananas from the passenger seat, got out of the truck, and walked, real slow, to the edge of the woods. The stink was still there, fainter now, but still there. I felt like an idiot, standing there in the pre-dawn dark, holding a bunch of bananas, talking to empty trees. But I did it anyway.